The wind owned this land. It came down from the high mesas of the Arizona Territory in the late 1870s, a scouring, restless thing. It carried the grit of red rock and the scent of dried juniper across the plains near Canyon de Chelly. The wind did not care about the new lines being drawn on the earth, but Inez did. He stood beside his pinto, one hand resting on the horse's neck, his gaze fixed on the raw, yellow pine stake driven deep into the parched soil. It was another survey marker for the Voss Rail and Cattle Company, pushed another 200 yards deeper into the disputed grazing lands than the last one he had found. Kai was a man built of the high plateau lean, patient, and hard to read. His black hair was tied back, and his eyes, steady and dark, had seen too much. He had worn the blue coat of an army scout for a time, learning the white man's ways of war and words, thinking it would help his people. The Dean. He learned it only helped the army. Now, he guided travelers, tracked lost stock, and mostly, he watched. He watched the railroad creep forward like a steel snake, and he watched the sky for the overdue monsoon. His goal was simple: to keep his family safe, to keep the valley, the ancestral valley that held his grandmother's hogan, from being swallowed by the greed that came with the locomotive smoke. He did not want violence, but he recognized its shadow lengthening on the ground. Miles away, in that same valley, his grandmother, Shimasani, was weaving. Her hands, wrinkled and sure, moved with a rhythm that was centuries old. She was the anchor of their small family. She had warned him, "You cannot stand in the middle of the wash when the flood comes." "Kai," she had said just that morning, her voice like dry leaves, "you will be swept away with the debris." His younger brother, Tahoe, was all restless energy. Tahoe was tired of the old ways, tired of being poor, his eyes drawn to the silver dollars and bright whiskey in Winslow. He saw the railroad as an opportunity, not a threat. Their differing views were a canyon between them, one Kai did not know how to bridge. And then there was Hasty Nyazi, the elder, who preached ho balance, harmony, walking in beauty. It was hard to walk in beauty when men were driving stakes into the heart of the earth. The same wind that scoured the mesa blew grit against the windows of the clapboard hotel in Winslow. Evelyn Callahan. Eve brushed dust from the brim of her hat. She was new, and she stood out. Her dark hair was pinned up practically, but her eyes, a clear, sharp green, missed nothing. She carried the legacy of her father, an Irish cowboy who had loved stories, and her mother, a traveling nurse who had believed in facts. Eve was a freelance reporter. Though she had told the hotel clerk she was researching a book on desert flora, her real research was tucked into a false bottom of her satchel. It was not the original ledger, but a meticulously copied version, stolen by a frightened clerk who had disappeared a week later. It was a map of bribes, payouts, and illegal land seizures, all orchestrated by Silas Voss. Voss was a name spoken with a mix of awe and fear. He was the railroad baron and the cattle king, a man building an empire of steel and beef. He did not get his hands dirty. For that, he had men like Judge Mercer, who twisted the law into a cudgel, and Blackjack Reeves, a man whose smile never reached his cold eyes, who led the crew of hard men who enforced the Vossa surveys. Eve knew the ledger was just paper. It was damning paper, full of names and dollar amounts, $500 here, 1,000 acres there, but it was not proof. She needed people. She needed to find the ranchers who had been squeezed out, the families whose wells had been suddenly fenced off. She needed someone to stand up and point a finger. She folded the copied pages and secured her bag. She felt the familiar knot in her stomach, the one that was equal parts fear and determination. Her father had been killed for asking the wrong questions, a story muffled by the authorities as a stable accident. Her mother's last words to her had been a plea: do the right thing. Evelyn, but do not be a fool. Do not die for it. Eve stepped out onto the boardwalk. The town was buzzing, but it was a low, nervous sound. She walked past the saloon, the tinny piano music spilling out with the smell of stale beer. She saw Reeves inside, leaning against the bar, laughing with two of his men. He was a broad-shouldered man in a black duster, his eponymous pistol worn low. He looked up as she passed, his eyes raking over her. Dismissing her? She kept walking. She needed supplies, and the general store was the hub of all town gossip. As she waited for the clerk to weigh out flour and coffee, she listened. Voss is bringing progress. One man, a merchant, said loudly. Progress for who muttered another. A freighter nursing a sarsaparilla. Heard he ran off the Jenkins family, just fenced right over their creek. That's Mercer's ruling, the merchant said, lowering his voice. Legal is legal. Then another voice, quieter. What about that scout? Nez heard he pulled up 3 survey stakes near the canyon. He is dangerous. That one, the merchant sniffed. Rides that line like he owns it. He probably does, the freighter grunted. Eve paid for her goods, her expression carefully neutral. They noticed her, the city girl with the notebook, asking too many questions about travel routes and water rights. The looks she got were suspicious. This was not a town that welcomed curiosity. She headed for the public water trough to fill her canteen before riding out. Her plan was to head toward the area the ledger had marked as Section 4, Disputed. Nez had ridden into Winslow for the same reason supplies, and to listen. He heard the same whispers. He heard his own name spoken like a curse by some and a question by others. He ignored them. He led his pinto to the trough, letting the horse drink deep. The animal was thirsty. The air was sucking the moisture out of everything. That was when he saw her. She was standing on the other side of the trough, a woman who looked as out of place as a porcelain cup in a blacksmith's shop. Yet, she was not delicate. She held herself with a straight spine, her green eyes clear and assessing as she filled her canteen. She was not wearing the fashionable, restrictive clothes of the East. She wore a split skirt, practical boots, and a sturdy hat. She looked up, and their eyes met across the width of the trough. Kai felt an immediate, prickling caution. She was a white woman, alone, and asking questions. He had seen her earlier near the land office. In his experience, that combination meant trouble. She was either a missionary, a fool, or a predator of a different kind. Eve saw a man who did not match the whispers. He was not the dangerous savage the merchant had implied. He was quiet, self-contained, and his eyes were startlingly intelligent. There was weariness in them, but also an unbroken strength, like the red rock itself. He looked at her not with the leering curiosity or easy dismissal she expected from men in towns like this, but with a sharp, neutral vigilance. It was the look of a man who measured everything. Neither of them spoke. The moment stretched, held in the dusty air. It was just a look, wariness meeting suspicion, curiosity meeting caution. Kai gave a curt nod, a gesture of acknowledgement. Not welcome. He pulled his pinto back from the water. Eve nodded in return, her hand tightening on her canteen. He swung up onto his horse in one fluid motion and guided the pinto away, heading back toward the high plains. Eve watched him go, a strange premonition settling over her. He was part of this story. She did not know how, but she knew it. Above them, the sky was no longer a flat, empty blue. To the east, towering clouds were building, their bellies a bruised purple. The wind died down, a sudden, heavy stillness falling over Winslow. It was the silence before the storm, the deep breath before the thunder. The monsoon was gathering its strength. Evelyn Callahan reached the livery, her arms laden with the supplies she had just purchased. Her bay mare nickered softly as she began organizing the flour and coffee into her saddlebags. Her fingers brushed against a heavy, unfamiliar object stuffed deep into the leather pouch. It was a canvas sack, rough to the touch, stenciled with the unmistakable logo of the Voss Rail and Cattle Company. She froze, her heart hammered against her ribs. She had not put that there. Before she could even pull the object fully into the light, a heavy hand clamped down hard on her shoulder. "Well now, what do we have here?" Blackjack Reeves's voice was a low, oily drawl of false surprise. He spun her around, his grip bruising. His two men, the ones from the saloon, moved to block her exit from the stable. The smell of stale whiskey and sweat washed over her. Reeves ripped the heavy sack from her saddlebag. He whistled, a low, theatrical sound, as he loosened the drawstring and poured a cascade of double eagle gold coins into his grimy palm. "This looks mighty like the payroll for the bridge crew," he announced, his voice rising, projecting to the small crowd of onlookers gathering at the livery entrance. "Mr. Silas Voss's goodwill fund for this town. And this fancy city girl," he sneered, jabbing a finger at her, "was trying to ride out quiet-like with it." He turned to the crowd, holding the gold high. "We got ourselves a thief." Eve's face went pale, but her voice was sharp. "I did not steal that. You know I did not. That was planted." "They all say that, sweetheart." Reeves laughed. He tossed the gold to one of his men and pulled a coil of rope from his saddle. "We are just going to take you to see Judge Mercer, soon as you are properly secured for travel." He advanced on her, shaking out a loop in the rope. Kai Nez had only made it to the edge of Winslow, the dust of the town still settling behind him, when the shouting began. He heard Reeves's distinctive bellow and paused, every instinct warning him to keep riding. This was white man trouble. It was not his fight. But he had seen the woman. He had seen the way Reeves and his men watched her. He turned his pinto, his movements unhurried, and rode back, the horse's hooves making almost no sound in the thick dust. He saw her then, backed against a stall, her face defiant but trapped. Reeves was advancing with the rope. "You cannot do this," she was saying, her hand gripping the strap of her satchel. "I can do whatever the hell I please," Reeves growled, reaching for her. Kai urged the pinto forward, stepping the horse directly between Reeves and Eve. The sudden appearance of the horse and rider made Reeves stumble back, his hand dropping to the butt of his pistol. "This ain't your business, Nez," Reeves spat, his eyes narrowing. "She does not look secured," Kai said. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "She looks like she is being threatened." "She is a thief, caught red-handed," Reeves countered. "Then the sheriff should handle it," Kai said. "Not you." Reeves's patience snapped. "You are done telling me what to do." He went for his gun. He was fast, renowned for it. But Kai was not playing that game. He did not reach for his own weapon. As Reeves' hand cleared the holster, Kai kicked his right foot free of the stirrup and drove his boot, hard, straight into Reeves's chest. The impact sent Reeves staggering backward into one of his men. His pistol discharged, the bullet cracking harmlessly into the livery roof. The crowd scattered. "Get your horse," Kai yelled at Eve, his voice no longer quiet. "Now." Eve did not need to be told twice. She scrambled onto the mare, her hands fumbling with the reins. Reeves's men were untangling themselves, shouting curses and drawing their own weapons. "Ride," Kai commanded, slapping the mare's rump hard. "North toward the wooden bridge, go." He wheeled his pinto, placing his own body and his horse as a shield. A bullet whined past his ear. Eve dug her heels in, the mare bolting from the stable, her satchel bouncing wildly at her hip. Kai followed a second later, the sound of hoofbeats and angry yells chasing them out of Winslow and into the open, ominous landscape. They rode hard, pushing the horses across the flat, open ground. The air, which had been still and heavy, was changing. The wind had returned, not as a breeze, but as a violent, gritty assault. The sky to the east was no longer just bruised clouds. It was a churning wall of brown dust, a monster waking up. "He is coming!" Eve yelled, glancing back. Reeves and his two men were visible, 400 yards back and closing. They were riding fresh horses, pushing them hard, knowing the flat terrain was in their favor. The bridge, Kai pointed ahead. It crosses the dry wash. It is the only way over. The bridge was a rickety, temporary structure of raw lumber, built by the Voss Rail Company to move survey crews. It spanned a deep, 30-foot-wide arroyo, a rocky scar in the earth that was usually bone-dry. They thundered toward it, the hooves of their horses pounding on the packed earth. The dust storm hit them just as they reached the wooden ramp. It was not a storm. It was an amputation of the world. In 1 second, the sky vanished. The sun was gone. They were plunged into a howling, suffocating twilight of red sand that tore at their skin and blinded them. "Keep going," Kai bellowed, his voice almost stolen by the wind. He pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth. Eve's mare shied, terrified by the sudden darkness and the hollow, rattling sound of the planks under her feet. Eve choked on the dust, urging the horse forward, seeing almost nothing. They were halfway across when a sound, sharper than the wind, tore through the air, the crack and splinter of heavy timber. One of Reeves's men, riding too fast and blinded by the dust, had missed the ramp. His horse had slammed full force into one of the main support beams. The entire structure shuddered violently. "It is going!" Kai yelled. The bridge tilted, groaning like a dying animal. Eve's mare lost her footing, scrambling on the shifting planks, and then the boards beneath her fell away. The horse screamed, falling into the arroyo. Eve was thrown clear from the saddle, sliding on the splintered wood, clawing for a handhold as she slid toward the collapsing edge. She screamed, her fingers found only air. A hand clamped onto her wrist like a steel trap. Kai had thrown himself from his pinto, landing flat on the last stable section of the bridge. He held her wrist with one hand, his other arm hooked around a thick support strut. The wind tried to peel them both from the structure and hurl them into the canyon. "I cannot hold on," Eve screamed, her boots dangling over the precipice. Kai did not reply. He grunted, a raw sound of pure effort, using the last of the bridge's failing integrity. He planted his feet and pulled. He hauled her upward, his muscles straining against her weight and the force of the storm. He dragged her over the edge and onto the solid ground of the north bank, just as the entire remaining structure tore free and crashed into the wash below. They lay panting in the dirt, the world reduced to the screaming wind and the sting of sand. They could not see 5 feet. The pinto, a horse trained for chaos, stood nearby, its head down, its back to the wind. Eve's mare was gone. "We have to move," Kai gasped, his voice raw. He grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. "This storm will strip the skin from our bones." He knew this land, even blind. He half dragged, half led her away from the roar of the collapsing wash, his hand still clamped on her arm. He moved by the feel of the land, guided by the slight upward slope. After what felt like an eternity, he stopped, pulling her down behind a low mound of earth. It was a hogan. It was old, a small, 6-sided structure of mud and juniper logs, long abandoned by a distant relative. The door was gone, but the walls were thick, 1.5 feet of packed earth. It was shelter. He pushed her inside, following her and collapsing against the curved wall. The sound of the storm was instantly muffled, dropping from a scream to a dull, distant roar. For a long minute, neither of them moved. They just breathed, the air in the hogan thick with old dust and the faint, clean scent of cedar. Finally, Eve spoke, her voice raspy and shaking. "He called me a thief. He planted that gold. You saw him." Kai was not looking at her. He was looking at the doorway, at the brown fog of dust swirling outside. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "What?" she asked, confused. "You are not here studying flowers," he stated. "You are not a tourist. You were at the land office this morning. You were at the trough. Now Blackjack Reeves, Silas Voss's head dog, is trying to arrest you, or kill you, over a bag of Voss's gold. Who are you?" Eve bristled, her fear turning to anger. She owed him her life, but she did not trust him. He was a former army scout. For all she knew, he was on Voss's payroll himself, playing some double game. "My name is Evelyn Callahan," she said, her voice tight. "I am a writer." "You are a liar," Kai said, the words sharp and cold. "Writers do not get framed for payroll theft, not unless they are writing things they should not be." He shifted, turning to face her more directly in the gloom. "Are you bait? Did they send you to draw me out? They have been trying to pin something on me for months. Was this for me?" The accusation stung Eve, sharp and deeply unfair. "Bait, I was nearly killed, my horse is dead, you saved my life. Yes, but do not dare accuse me of being in league with those men." "Then why are you here?" Kai pressed, his voice relentless. "What is in that satchel, the one you clutched even as you were falling from the bridge?" Eve clutched the bag to her chest. "It is none of your business." "I made it my business," Kai countered, his voice rising for the first time. "When I pulled you from that bridge, my horse is outside. Yours is gone. You are in my land. Everything from here to the mountains is my business." He pushed himself up from the wall, and a sharp wince betrayed him. He favored his left arm. "You are hurt," Eve said, her tone changing instantly from defensive to observant. "It is nothing." "Let me see." She moved toward him, her nurse mother's instincts taking over. Kai flinched, pulling his arm back. "I said it is nothing." "I am the daughter of a nurse," Eve said, her voice firm but quiet, leaving no room for argument. "Stop being proud and let me see the damage." He hesitated, his pride warring with a sharp throb in his arm. He slowly extended his left forearm. A jagged piece of wood from the bridge, a foot long, was embedded deep in the muscle, the cloth of his shirt dark and wet with blood. Sweet heavens. Eve breathed. She set her satchel down, pushing aside the precious ledger, and pulled out a small, leather-bound medical kit. Inside were a bottle of carbolic acid, clean linen rags, and a steel forceps. "This will hurt," she warned. "It already hurts," he replied, his jaw tight. She braced his arm on her knee. He saw her hands. They were shaking. The terror of the last hour was still in her, but the moment her fingers touched the wound, they became steady. She grasped the splinter firmly. "Breathe out," she commanded. She pulled. Kai hissed, a sharp intake of breath, his whole body tensing. He fought the urge to pull away. The splinter came free. Blood welled up, dark in the dim light. Eve immediately pressed a rag soaked in carbolic to the open wound. As she worked, cleaning and bandaging, her fingers brushed against a patch of scarred skin on his shoulder. Just visible at the torn collar of his shirt, it was an old, puckered scar, the kind a mini ball leaves. Kai's breath hitched, an involuntary reaction. He had a deep, visceral hatred of being touched there, a remnant of the army surgeon's tent, of pain and ether and helplessness. He looked away, steeling himself. Eve noticed his reaction, the tensing of his muscles. She finished tying the bandage, her touch becoming gentle. "The old ones are worse than the new ones. Sometimes," she said softly. He looked at her, startled by the sudden, quiet understanding. He pulled his arm back, testing the bandage. It was tight, clean, and professional. He turned to his own saddlebag, which he had managed to grab from the pinto. He pulled out his canteen and a strip of dried venison. He tore the meat in two and handed her half. He offered the canteen. She took them. "Thank you." The storm was easing. The wind's scream had dropped to a mournful moan. The dust began to settle inside the hogan, the air clearing slightly. Kai reached into a small pouch on his belt and pulled out a sprig of dried juniper. He found a piece of flint in his bag and, after a few strikes, lit the sprig. It smoldered, filling the small space with a sharp, clean, piney scent. He waved the smoke over himself, over his new wound, and then gestured with it toward Eve. "What is that?" she asked, her voice still raspy. "To clear the air," he said, "to chase away the bad things that happened. My grandmother, my Shima-sani, says it reminds us of Hozo. Hozo. Balance, harmony, living in beauty." He gestured to his arm, and then to the doorway, indicating the memory of the bridge. "This is not Hozo, it is chaos. Reeves brings chaos." Eve watched the smoke curl in the dusty light. She had spent her entire adult life chasing facts, chasing proof, chasing justice. She had never once stopped to consider balance. "I am here," she said, making a decision, "because of Silas Voss." Kai's gaze sharpened, his stillness absolute. "He is stealing land. He is stealing it from your people, the Dine, and he is stealing it from white settlers, too. He is using Judge Mercer to make it legal, and men like Blackjack Reeves to enforce it." She opened her satchel. She did not hand him the papers, but she pulled out the copied ledger and held it open for him to see. "This is his book, or a copy of it. Bribes, fake surveys, names, dates, dollar amounts." Kai leaned forward. His eyes scanned the pages, moving faster than she would have thought possible. He recognized the names of headmen who had been offered whiskey and blankets. He recognized the survey coordinates. Plots of land dangerously close to his own valley, land that held sacred springs. "This is paper," he said at last, echoing her own earlier fears. "I know," Eve said. "It is not enough. I have to get it to the federal court in Santa Fe. The territorial court in Prescott is in Mercer's pocket. If I can get this to a federal marshal, if I can find the people listed in this book and get them to testify, well..." "Santa Fe," Kai said flatly. He looked at her, the suspicion returning, but it was different now, calculated. The path to Santa Fe, the only safe one that avoids Voss's main patrols, cuts right through my family's grazing land. You want me to guide you. I did not know who you were when I came here," Eve said honestly. "But yes, I need a guide. I will pay you." Kai let out a short, harsh breath that was almost a laugh. "Pay me! That bag of gold Reeves tried to pin on you would not be enough. Do you know what happens if I am seen with you now that frame-up becomes real? They will say I am your accomplice. They will have an excuse to move on my family. You put everyone in my valley at risk." "And what happens if I do nothing?" Eve countered, her voice rising, her fear replaced by the passion that had driven her this far. "What happens if you do nothing? Voss will not stop. He will take your valley anyway. He will take your sacred springs. He will do it with his law and his progress. And this," she slapped the ledger, "is the only chance to stop him with the white man's own weapon." Kai stared into the dimness, at the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light. She was right. He was tired of pulling up survey stakes only to find them replaced 2 days later. He was tired of watching the steel snake crawl closer. 48 hours, he said. "What?" 2 days. 48 hours. I will get you to the edge of the high mesas, past Reeves's main patrols. From there, you can follow the main track toward Fort Wingate. After that, you are on your own." "That is not all the way to Santa Fe," she protested. "It is what I am offering," he said, his voice final. "Take it, or stay here and wait for Reeves to find you." Eve nodded slowly. 48 hours, all right." "One condition," Kai added, his voice hard as iron. "No more lies. You tell me everything I ask. If I am guiding you, I need to know exactly what I am walking into." "Agreed." Eve said, "No lies." The storm had passed. The air coming through the open doorway was cool and washed clean. But with the wind gone, a new sound traveled on the air, the distant, unmistakable crackle of fire. Kai was on his feet instantly. He moved to the low rise by the Hogan and looked south, back toward Winslow. Eve joined him. In the gathering dusk, they could see them 4 separate fires. They were not wildfires. They were set in a deliberate line, moving north, eating up the dry brush. "He is not giving up," Eve whispered, her hand tightening on her satchel strap. "He knows we are on this side of the wash," Kai said grimly. "The bridge is out. He is lighting the brush. He thinks he can smoke us out, push us into the open where he can see us." "He is trying to trap us." "He is," Kai agreed. He looked at the sky. Night was falling fast. "We cannot move in the dark with those fires. We rest here. At first light, we move, before they can track us in the daylight." They returned to the hogan. A fire was impossible. The smoke would be a beacon. It would be a cold camp. Kai took the first watch, sitting in the doorway, his rifle across his knees, his gaze fixed on the flickering orange glow to the south. Eve sat inside, her back against the rough mud wall, wrapping her arms around her knees. She was exhausted, bruised, and hunted, but for the first time in a long time, she was not entirely alone. After an hour, Kai spoke from the doorway, his voice low. "Sleep. I will wake you in 3 hours for your watch." Eve wanted to argue, to say she could stand watch with him, but the exhaustion was a physical weight. She lay down on the packed earth, her satchel clutched to her chest as a pillow. She woke with a start, the darkness complete. Kai was still sitting there, a solid silhouette against the star-filled sky. She sat up. "You did not wake me," she accused him softly. "You needed the sleep. I am used to the watch," he replied, not turning. She moved, crawling stiffly from the back of the hogan. She did not sit beside him, but sat a few feet away, her back to the opposite side of the doorway. They sat back to back, two strangers bound by a common enemy. They watched the darkness, listening to the faint crackle of Reeves's fires, a fragile, unspoken trust forming in the silence of the high desert. The fires burned low by the time the false dawn painted the sky in shades of bruised gray. The air was sharp with the smell of wet ash and juniper. Kainez rose, his body stiff from the cold ground and the long watch. His arm throbbed, a dull ache beneath the clean bandage Evelyn Callahan had applied. She was already awake, her knees drawn to her chest, her satchel clutched in her lap. The dust storm had caked her dark hair with red grit, and there were new lines of exhaustion around her green eyes. But her spine was straight. She had lost her horse and all her supplies, save for that one bag. "We ride double?" Kai said. It was not a question. "My pinto can carry us, but it will be slow." Eve looked at the horse, then at him. She was a woman who valued her independence, and the thought of riding close behind him, dependent, clearly chafed. But she nodded, her pride swallowed by necessity. "All right." He helped her up behind the saddle, his hand briefly on her waist. She settled herself, her hands finding a purchase on the back of his saddle cantle, trying to keep a small space between them. Kai swung up in front of her. He felt her presence behind him, a small, tense weight. He urged the pinto north, away from the burned-out line, away from the tracks of Reeves and his men. He did not follow the main trails. He cut deep into the maze of small canyons and rocky washes that he knew as well as the lines on his own hand. 4 hours. They rode in silence. The only sound the pinto's hooves on rock and sand. Eve, unused to riding double, fought to maintain her balance. More than once. A sudden dip in the trail threw her forward, forcing her to grab his waist to keep from falling. She felt the hard, lean muscles of his back, the contained tension in his body. She said nothing, but her grip lingered for a second longer than was strictly necessary. They arrived near noon, not at a town, but at a cluster of 3 hogans tucked into a protective fold of red rock. A brush ramada offered shade, a small, stubborn patch of corn fought the dry soil, and a pen held a small flock of sheep. A thin blue-gray tendril of smoke rose from the central hogan. A lean-bodied dog shot out, barking, its teeth bared, until it recognized the pinto. It stopped, its tail giving a single, cautious wag. A young man emerged from the largest hogan, shading his eyes. He was built like Kai, but where Kai was still, this man vibrated with a restless, impatient energy. It was Tahoe, Kai's younger brother. His eyes took in Kai, noted the rifle held ready across his lap, and then fixed on Eve. His face, which had been open with welcome for his brother, shut down, becoming a mask of deep, immediate suspicion. "Who is she?" Tahoe demanded in English, his voice hostile. He looked past her, as if expecting to see soldiers. "She needs water," Kai said simply, swinging down from the horse. He turned and offered a hand to Eve. She ignored it, sliding down by herself, her legs stiff and unsteady. The door flap of the main hogan was pushed aside. A woman emerged, bent with age but moving with a deliberate grace. Her face was a beautiful map of deep wrinkles, her silver-black hair tied in a traditional bun. Her eyes, dark and impossibly bright, missed nothing. They swept over Kai's bandaged arm, paused on Eve for a long, assessing moment, and then looked at the northern sky, as if reading the weather. This was Shi Masani, his grandmother. Kai spoke to her in Dine, his voice low and respectful. He did not tell the whole story, but he told enough: the trouble in Winslow, the lie about the gold, the fight at the bridge. Shi Masani listened, her gaze never leaving Eve. When Kai finished, she stepped forward. She spoke in English, her voice as dry and clear as the desert air. "You bring the storm with you, white woman." Eve met her gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "The storm was already here," she replied, her voice rough with dust. "I am just caught in it." The old woman held her stare for a beat longer, then gave a small, sharp nod. "The water is inside. Come." Later, as Eve drank gratefully from a dipper, her shoulders aching, Shi Masani found Kai outside as he checked the pinto's hooves. "You stand in the middle of the wash, my son," she said quietly, her hands already busy sorting a handful of dried herbs. "I am protecting her until she can leave," Kai said, his voice low. 2 days, then she is on her own. To be neutral for too long is to side with the strongest, Shi Masani stated, not looking at him. Silas Voss is the strongest. By doing nothing, by standing in the middle, you are letting him win. Her words struck Kai precisely where he was most conflicted. He had tried to walk the line of neutrality for 2 years, and it had only allowed the survey stakes to creep closer. Eve felt the hostility from Tahoe and 2 of his friends who had gathered. They watched her, their faces closed. They muttered to each other in Dine, and she did not need a translator to understand the suspicion. One of them, a young man with a defiant look, spat on the ground near her boots. Eve's first instinct was to flare, to use the sharp, biting sarcasm that had served her well in newspaper offices back east. But she was not in the east, and she was a guest. She thought of her mother, who had walked into cholera camps and field hospitals, her strength always quiet. She saw Shi Masani, her small frame stooped, lift a heavy wooden bucket filled with water. Before Kai could move, Eve crossed the yard. "Let me," she said, taking the bucket. The old woman looked surprised, then released her grip. Eve, her muscles screaming from the ride, hauled the heavy bucket to the cooking fire. The young men stopped muttering. Later, she saw a woman grinding corn on a flat stone mettet, her movements rhythmic. Eve sat nearby. After a moment, she pointed. "May I?" The woman, Tahoe's cousin, looked at Tahoe, who shrugged. The woman nodded. Eve knelt, took the smaller stone, and began to grind. She was clumsy. Her hands were soft and quickly blistered. The woman showed her how to use her weight, how to rock with the motion. Eve listened, She did not talk about herself. She did not ask questions. She just worked, her back aching, her hands raw, until a small pile of blue cornmeal gathered on the stone. She had earned nothing yet, but she was no longer just an object of suspicion. She was, for now, a woman who worked. In the afternoon, Hasty and Yazzie arrived. The elder walked slowly, leaning on a juniper stick. He had heard of the commotion Kai's arrival had caused. He sat by the fire, accepting a dipper of water. Kai sat with him and explained, this time in more detail. He told him about the ledger, the map of bribes. Hasty and Yazzie listened, his ancient eyes thoughtful. The paper is a white man's trick, he said at last, his voice a low rumble. Words on paper can be burned, but the land does not lie. Come. He beckoned to Kai and Eve. They walked with him, Tahoe and his friends following behind, still watchful. The elder led them up a small rise overlooking a wide, shallow valley. The line, the treaty line, was here. Hasty and Yazzie said, he pointed his stick to a dark, worn stain on a flat sandstone boulder. My grandfather's grandfather showed me this mark. It has always been the mark. He then pointed down into the valley. Perhaps 50 yards south, a fresh, raw pine stake, identical to the one Kai had found before, was driven into the earth. Now, the Voss stake is there, the old man said. And the old stone marker. He pointed again, this time to a pile of rocks that had clearly been recently disturbed. Has been moved. Eve's breath caught. They moved the boundary markers. In the night, Hasty and Yazzie confirmed. They dig up the old treaty stones and set new ones. They think we do not see. Eve moved forward, her reporter's mind clicking into place. She knelt by the disturbed rocks, ignoring the dirt. She saw the fresh scrape marks of a steel shovel, not a wooden digging stick. Further down, she saw the wide, deep ruts of a heavy freight wagon, the kind needed to haul boundary stones, not the light tracks of a buckboard or a rider. She turned to Kai, her eyes alive. My camera, the box camera, it was on my horse. Kai's expression was grim. No, I grabbed your satchel from the pommel before the mare fell. I thought it was just your papers. Eve's hands flew to the bag. She had forgotten completely. She tore it open, pulling out the ledger, her medical kit. And there, at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was her heavy box camera and a tin of fresh photographic plates. She let out a gasp of pure relief. What is that box? Tahoe asked, his suspicion returning. A truth box, Eve said, her hands cradling the heavy wooden device. It captures the light. It does not know how to lie. She spent the next hour, a precious, fading hour of afternoon light. She set up the camera, her hands quick and practiced. She took a photograph of the original, stained line on the sandstone boulder. She took one of the new Voss survey stake. She photographed the pile of moved rocks, capturing the fresh shovel marks. She documented the deep, distinctive wagon ruts. She even found a clear impression in the damp earth near the moved stone, the perfect outline of a heavy sledgehammer. Evidence, she whispered, sliding the last plate carefully back into its case. This is not just a name in a book. This is proof. They returned to the cluster of hogans as the sun touched the western mesas. The mood was different. Eve's truth box was a new, strange magic, and the proof it held was dangerous. A shout from Tahoe, who was watching the flock, shattered the evening calm. Riders! 4 horsemen were approaching from the south. They were not riding fast. They were riding with the slow, deliberate arrogance of men who knew they had the power. It was Blackjack Reeves and 3 of his men. Kai stepped out of the hogan, his rifle in his hand. Though he held it loosely, the muzzle pointed at the ground. Eve came out and stood beside him. Her heart was a cold hammer in her chest. Reeves reined in 20 yards away, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He ignored Kai and fixed his gaze on Eve. Nez, Reeves called out, his voice oily. I am not here for you. I am here for her. She is under my protection, Kai said, his voice level. Not anymore. Reeves laughed, enjoying the moment. He pulled a folded paper from his duster and shook it open. This here is a warrant, signed by Judge Mercer himself, for the arrest of one Evelyn Callahan, for theft of company property and assault on a company agent. That agent, he tapped his own chest, would be me. Eve felt the blood drain from her face. This was how it had started with her father. A false charge, a compliant judge, and then an accident. It is a lie, she said, her voice shaking but loud. He is a liar? The law is the law, sweetheart, Reeves sneered. He started to dismount, swinging his leg over the saddle. Now, you give her to me, Nez, and you and your kin can stay out of this. This is your last chance to be sensible. This was the moment. Kai saw it. Shima Sani's words about neutrality echoed in his head. He could give Eve up, and his family would be safe, for now. Or he could stand his ground and bring the storm directly to his own door. He raised his hand, palm out, a gesture of peace and a command. Stop! Reeves froze, one foot still in the stirrup. Kai spoke, his voice clear and carrying in the still evening air. You know the old paper, Reeves, the Fort Sumner Agreement. It states that no agent of the government, no soldier, and no one acting with their authority may enter a dine home without the consent of the head of that household. This ain't a fort, one of Reeves's men spat, his hand on his pistol. This is my grandmother's home, Kai said, his voice turning to iron. Shima Sani had stepped into the doorway, her arms folded, her presence as solid as the rock behind her. She is the head of this household. Judge Mercer's warrant and his authority stops right where you stand. You are not welcome. You may not cross this line. Reeves's smile vanished, replaced by a dark, mottled red. He was being challenged, not with a gun, but with a law, an old treaty paper he barely understood but knew he could not cross without starting a war he was not prepared for. He looked at Kai, at the rifle held so casually. He looked at Tahoe, who now stood with his own rifle. That is a clever trick. Nez, Reeves hissed, pulling his leg back over his horse. A real clever Indian trick, but she cannot hide in there forever. That warrant is good all across this territory. She will not be here forever. Kai agreed. Now leave. Reeves stared at him, his eyes promising violence. Then he yanked his horse's head around so sharply the animal reared. This is not over, he snarled. The four riders galloped away, disappearing into the dusk. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the bleating of the sheep. Tahoe looked at his older brother with a new, grudging respect. Eve let out a breath she had not known she was holding. That was... she began. A delay, Kai said, his face grim. He was watching the riders retreat. It bought us time, nothing more. He knew Reeves. A man like that could not let a challenge stand. As if summoned by the thought. A new sound split the air. It was not gunfire. It was the crashing of brush, the lowing of cattle, and a frantic shout from Tahoe, who had run to the edge of the rise. Know the corn. A herd of at least 40 Voss-branded longhorns was stampeding through the small, dry-farmed corn patch. They were not strays. They had been deliberately driven, goaded into a run, straight through the family's meager crop. Kai and Tahoe ran, shouting, waving their arms. But it was too late. The cattle thundered through, their hooves trampling the green stalks, destroying in minutes what had taken months to grow. The family's winter supply was gone, pounded into the red dust. It was Reeves's answer. It was the message. The small war had begun. That night, the mood by the fire was bleak. The ruined field was a dark, silent accusation. He will not stop, Kai said, his voice flat, his neutrality burned away with the corn. I know, Eve whispered. My 2-day offer is useless, he went on, staring into the flames. He will be waiting at Fort Wingate. He will have men on every road south. He will be waiting for you. I still have to go, Eve said, her voice quiet but unbroken. This, she touched her satchel. This proof, and that ledger, it has to get to Santa Fe. Kai looked at her. He looked at the blisters on her hands from grinding corn. He thought of her standing beside him, not behind him. When Reeves rode up, he thought of her mother's warning. Do the right thing, but do not die stupid. There is another way, he said, the decision made. A hard way. We ride north, through the Lukachukai Mountains. It is a goat trail, not a road. It will add 100 miles to the journey. But it will bypass his patrols. It will bring you into Santa Fe from the north, where they will not be looking. Eve's head snapped up. You will take me. I will take you. Kai said, this is not just your fight anymore. He destroyed my grandmother's corn. He brought the war to my home. In the pre-dawn darkness, as they prepared to leave, Masani approached Eve. Tahoe had agreed to lend Eve his sturdy Mustang. The old woman held out her hand. In her palm lay a small, smooth piece of turquoise, dark blue with a spiderweb of black, tied to a simple leather thong. For protection, Masani said. She took Eve's left wrist. Eve tensed, expecting the old woman to simply tie it on. Instead, Masani just held her wrist, her thumb pressing lightly against Eve's pulse, her ancient eyes searching Eve's face. You enter a home. The home enters you, she said, her voice soft but strong. You carry our story now, too. Do not let it be for nothing. She tied the thong around Eve's wrist. It felt less like a gift and more like a bond. Kai mounted his pinto. He nodded to his grandmother. I will return. Walk in beauty, she replied. Kai and Eve turned their horses, not south toward the broken bridge, but north toward the dark, rising silhouette of the mountains. The real journey, the one they would walk together, had begun. The Lukachukai Mountains were a brutal barrier, a jagged spine of rock and wind that protected the eastern edge of Deneta, the Navajo homeland. Kainez led them into the high canyons, following trails that were often little more than sheep tracks etched into the scree. The journey was a rhythm of danger, silence, and sudden, sharp realizations. They rode through narrow slot canyons where the walls were so close they had to ride single file, the horses' flanks scraping the sandstone. They climbed wind-scoured mesas where the gusts threatened to peel them from their saddles. For 2 days, they saw no one. They were utterly alone, suspended between the red earth and the infinite blue sky. Kai was a different man here. In Winslow, he had been watchful and contained. Here, he was a part of the land itself. He read the smallest signs, a displaced pebble, the track of a fox, the way the high clouds moved. Eve watched him, her respect for him growing into a quiet awe. He was patient, not just with the hard trail, but with her. He showed her how to conserve the horse's energy on a steep climb, how to find water by watching for a certain kind of green brush. On the 3rd day, they descended from the high rock into the scrublands. They were low on supplies, particularly grain for the horses. Tahoe's Mustang was sturdy, but the hard ride was taking its toll. There is a trading post ahead, Kai said, his voice low. It is run by a man who trades fairly, but it is on a main freight route. We will be exposed. We need the supplies, Eve said, her own throat raw from the dust. We have to risk it. The post was a low sod-roofed building squatting in a vast, empty plain. 2 freight wagons were parked outside, their mules resting. I will go, Eve said. They will be looking for you, not me. What do we need? Kai looked at her, his gaze assessing. The wanted poster Reeves had mentioned would surely be here. Grain, coffee, salt, and flour. Do not buy too much. Just enough to look like a traveler.
What about you?
I will be close, he said. He dismounted, leading the horses into a shallow arroyo 100 yards from the post. If there is trouble, ride east. Do not wait for me. Just ride. Eve nodded, the knot of fear tightening in her stomach. She slid from the Mustang, her satchel heavy on her hip, and walked into the dusty, dim interior of the post. The air was thick with the smells of cured tobacco, axle grease, and old wool. Two rough-looking men, their clothes stained with bacon grease and dirt, were leaning against the counter, talking to the trader. Eve kept her head down, her hat shielding her face. As she waited, her eyes scanned the room, and then she saw it. It was nailed to a thick wooden beam, right next to a calendar advertising liver pills. It was a fresh, printed poster. Wanted for horse theft and assault. Grinned, alive. $100 reward, by order of Judge J. Mercer. Eve's blood went cold. $100. It was enough to make any desperate man a hunter. Help you, ma'am? The trader asked, his eyes curious. Flour, Eve said, her voice steady. 5 pounds, and coffee. The two men at the counter had stopped talking. They were watching her. One was a thick-bodied man with a grizzled beard. The other was thin, with nervous, darting eyes. That is a long way from the railroad, ma'am, the grizzled one said. His name, she would learn, was Beck. I am meeting my husband, Eve replied coolly, not looking at him. He is scouting for a new line. Is that right? The thin one. Mills chimed in. He gestured with his chin toward the door. Those your horses in the wash? Eve paid the trader, her hands moving deliberately. They are? Why? Beck pushed himself off the counter and ambled toward the door, Mills following. Just wondering. We are looking for a man, an Indian, rode off with a pinto. Looks a lot like that one you got tied down there. Eve followed them out into the blinding sunlight, her heart pounding. Kai had stepped out of the arroyo, standing near the pinto's head, his rifle held loosely in one hand. He was perfectly still. Beck and Mills stopped, their hands hovering near the pistols on their hips. That is him, Mills said, his voice excited. That is the man on the poster. Ma'am, Beck said, his eyes on Kai. You should step away. We are here to claim that bounty. We mean you no harm. Eve's mind raced. She saw the glint in their eyes. This was not about justice. It was about $100. This was Reeves's dirty trick, spreading a net across the territory. She stepped forward, placing herself between the bounty hunters and Kai. You are mistaken, she said, her voice carrying a cold authority that surprised even herself. This is my husband, and that warrant is a lie. Beck laughed, a harsh, barking sound. His husband, ma'am, you are white. And he is my guide. Eve snapped, changing tactics. And my employee, we are checking the Highline ballast for the new terminus spur. He is under contract with the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. She used the words she had seen in the ledger, the technical railroad slang she had memorized. Beck and Mills paused. This was complicated. A woman who spoke like a railroad agent was not what they expected. The poster says horse theft, Mills insisted, though his voice wavered. A lie told by Silas Voss and Blackjack Reeves, Eve said, her voice ringing with conviction. They are trying to stop our survey. You interfere with him. You are interfering with the United States government's railroad expansion. She was bluffing, projecting an authority she did not possess, but the names Voss and Reeves, spoken with such contempt, gave them pause. They were just hired men. They did not want to get caught between two powerful forces. Kai had not moved, had not spoken a word. He just watched them, his eyes flat and cold, waiting. Beck looked at Kai, then at Eve. He looked at the rifle in Kai's hand, and the way he held it, as if it were a part of his own arm. He looked at the determination in Eve's face. "This ain't worth the trouble." Beck muttered to Mills, "This smells bad." "But the money," Mills whined. "Forget the money." Beck growled. He tipped his hat to Eve, a gesture of grudging respect, or perhaps just dismissal. "Ma'am, you have a good day." They turned, mounted their own horses, and rode south, back toward the freight road. Eve let out a breath and found her legs were shaking. She turned to Kai. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, but a faint light danced in his dark eyes. "Terminus spur?" he asked quietly, as he packed the supplies onto the Mustang. "Railroad talk," Eve said, her voice still a little shaky. "I read it in some of the reports. It sounds important." "It sounded like you knew what you were saying," he said. He finished tying the last knot. "You lied well." "I have had to," she said. The shared danger, the lie they had told together, settled between them, pulling them closer. The act of being his wife, of defending him so fiercely, had felt disturbingly real. They rode north, pushing hard, knowing Beck and Mills might change their minds, or find Reeves. They did not, but the bounty hunters were not done. 2 days later, Kai sensed it. He reined in his Pinto, his head tilted, listening to the wind. "What is it?" Eve asked. "Company," he said. "The two from the post. They must have circled back." "How do you know?" "A raven," he said, pointing to a single black bird circling high above a ridge to their left. "It is following something, and it is not a coyote." He led them off the trail, into a deep, dry arroyo with steep, rocky sides. "Dismount! Here!" He took his rifle. He handed her Tahoe's rifle, the one that had been tied to the Mustang's saddle. "Can you use this?" "I have fired one," she said, her hands grasping the heavy wooden stock. "At bottles, I am not a good shot." "You do not need to be a good shot," Kai said, his voice calm and low. "You just need to make noise." He checked the load in his own rifle. "Stay behind this rock. Do not fire unless I do." They waited. The silence of the arroyo was absolute. Then, the sound of horses moving carelessly, their hooves clattering on the rock above. "There they are." It was Mills's voice, sharp with triumph. "Trapped in the wash." A shot cracked, the bullet whining off the rock face high above Eve's head, spraying her with stone dust. She cried out, dropping into the dirt. "Stay down," Kai commanded. Beck and Mills were on the rim, outlined against the sky. Perfect targets. Too easy. Kai raised his rifle, but he did not fire. "Leave now," he shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "This is your only warning." "Give us the horse thief, and we will," Beck yelled back. Another shot chipped the rock near Kai. Eve saw Mills, the thinner man, move to the side, trying to get a better angle. He was bracing his rifle on a boulder, aiming directly at Kai, who was focused on Beck. Eve's hands were slick with sweat. Her heart hammered so hard she could not breathe. She thought of her father. She thought of Shima Sani's turquoise bracelet on her wrist. Do not let it be for nothing. She raised the rifle, her arms shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She pointed it at the sky above Mills and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The rifle stock slammed into her shoulder. A brutal, painful kick. The shot went wide, a foot or more over Mills's head. But it was enough. The sudden, unexpected shot from a second person made Mills flinch, pulling his own shot wide. The distraction was all Kai needed. Kai did not aim for the man. His rifle cracked. A single, sharp report. 70 yards away. Mills's hat flew from his head as if snatched by an invisible hand. A half-second of total silence. Mills clapped a hand to his head, his eyes wide with terror, feeling for blood that was not there. "The next one will not miss." Kai's voice boomed up the canyon wall. That was enough. Beck grabbed Mills by the shirt and hauled him back from the rim. They scrambled for their horses. A moment later, Eve and Kai heard the sound of hoofbeats, fading fast, not to return. Eve was still on the ground, the heavy rifle across her lap, her shoulder on fire, the smell of gunpowder stinging her nose. She was shaking from head to toe. Kai walked over to her. He did not offer a hand. He just stood, looking down at her. "You are shaking," he observed. "I am fine," she said, her teeth chattering. "You missed him." "I know," she said, humiliated. "I told you I was not a good shot." "You made him move," Kai said. He ejected the spent shell from his rifle. "You made him look away. That was all I needed." He reached down then, offering his hand. "Good shot." She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. The warmth of his grip, the simple, honest praise, steadied her. They rode on, the bond between them now forged in smoke and gunpowder. Late that afternoon, they found him. He was staggering in the middle of a shad-scale flat, his clothes torn, his lips cracked and black. He was a white man, and he was delirious, waving his arms at things that were not there. "Water," he croaked. As they approached, Eve was off the Mustang instantly, uncorking her canteen. Kai supported the man, easing him to the ground. "Slowly," Kai warned. "Not too much." Eve held the canteen to the man's lips, letting him take small, desperate sips. They rested him in the shade of a meager mesquite. After an hour, his eyes began to focus. He was young, no more than 25, with the pale skin of an office worker, now burned lobster red by the sun. "Who are you?" Eve asked gently. Arthur Finch," he whispered. "Surveyor." Kai and Eve exchanged a look. "Who did you work for?" Eve asked, her voice quiet. "Voss Rail?" Finch choked out. I thought it was a good job. Honest work. What happened to you?" Kai asked. "I asked too many questions," Finch said, his eyes filling with tears of self-pity and terror. "The maps, they did not match. The old treaty lines, the geological survey markers, our lines were wrong, sometimes by half a mile." Eve's hand tightened on her satchel. "What did you do?" "I told my supervisor, a man named Reeves." Kai went still. "He told me to shut up and run the lines he gave me, but it was wrong. I sent a telegraph to the main office in Prescott, just asking for clarification." Finch was shaking now. "The next day, Reeves rode out to my camp. He said I was being reassigned. He took my horse. He took my water. He said I should walk back and think about my loyalty. He was a man abandoned, left to die because he had a conscience." "Mr. Finch," Eve said, leaning close. "This is vital. You said you ran the lines he gave you. Where did he get those lines?" "From the telegraph," Finch whispered, his eyes closing in exhaustion. "An internal company wire. It came from Judge Mercer's office. An adjustment. He called it an adjustment to Section 4. He was ordering us to move the markers. There it was, the human proof. The man who connected the ledger to the judge. They could not take him. He was too weak to ride, and he would slow them to a crawl. Kai knew a place, a hidden spring, 2 miles away, known only to the Dine. They took him there, gave him the last of their dried venison, and left him with Tahoe's rifle. "Stay here," Kai instructed him. "Drink and rest. When your strength returns, walk south, only south. You will hit the Army Patrol Road to Fort Wingate. Tell the soldiers what you told us. Tell them Kai Nez sent you." Finch nodded, clutching the rifle. "He will kill me." "Not before you talk to the marshal in Santa Fe," Eve said. She wrote down a name. "Ask for Marshal Egan. Tell him Evelyn Callahan is coming." That evening, the world changed. The sky, which had been a harsh, brassy yellow, turned a deep, bruised purple. The air grew still and cool. Then, the first drops of the monsoon began to fall. It was not the violent, dusty squall of the plains. It was a steady, soaking, life-giving rain. The parched earth drank it in, the smell of wet creosote and dust rising in a perfume so thick they could taste it. They found shelter under a massive cliff overhang, a place Kai knew, as the rain curtained them off from the world. Eve saw that the rock wall behind them was covered in ancient drawings, petroglyphs carved into the dark desert varnish. There were men with shields, spirals, herds of bighorn sheep. Kai built a small, smokeless fire. The mood was different. The day's violence, coupled with the surveyor's desperate story, had sobered them. Eve sat near the fire, pulling out a small notebook and a pencil. She began to write, compiling her notes, drafting the letters she would send, combining the ledger, her photos. And now, Arthur Finch's testimony. She wrote for an hour, the pencil scratching, the rain hissing outside. When she finished, she looked at Kai. He was staring into the fire, his face carved by shadow and light. "This is it," she said, holding out the notebook. "This is what I will tell them. All of it." He took the book. He read it, his eyes moving slowly over her neat, precise script. He read her accusations against Voss, her detailing of the ledger, her notes on the moved boundary stones, and her summary of Finch's story. She had trusted him with her life, but now she was trusting him with her work, her truth. He handed it back to her. "It is strong," he said. He then reached into the small leather pouch at his neck. He pulled out a small, folded piece of buckskin. He did not open it. He just held it. "When I was a scout," he said, his voice so low she had to lean in to hear him, "I learned to be what they wanted me to be. Hard, empty. I thought it was strength, but it was just a different kind of trap." He looked at the pouch. "My mother died when I was young. My brother, Tahoe, he wants the white man's silver. He does not see the poison in it. I do this." He nodded toward her notebook. "For them. So Tahoe does not have to become what I was. So he can stay dying." It was the deepest wound he had, the fear for his family's soul. He was trusting her with his weakness, his own family's vulnerability. She wanted to say something, but the words would not come. The moment was too raw. As the rain softened, they rode to the nearest settlement, a tiny, wind-blasted telegraph and post station called Two Rivers. It was not much more than a collection of shacks. The post station was full of white freighters, their faces hostile as Kai walked in behind Eve. "He waits outside." The pimply young clerk, Cyrus, snapped, his hand on a pistol. "He is with me," Eve said. "I do not care. No Indians inside." Kai met Eve's eyes. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and stepped back out into the rain. Eve's fury was a cold, hard stone. She turned back to the clerk. "I need to send a letter and a telegraph to Santa Fe, to the federal marshal." Cyrus smirked. "That's so. I will take this." An older woman with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes pushed the clerk aside. Her name tag read, Martha, Postmistress. "Cyrus, go check the mule harnesses. Now." Cyrus scowled but obeyed. Martha, the postmistress, turned to Eve. "Marshal Egan, in Santa Fe?" she asked, her voice a low whisper. Eve nodded, surprised. "A man named Reeves was through here yesterday," Martha said, her back to the other men in the room. "He asked about a woman traveling with a Navajo scout. He also paid Cyrus $20 to hold any letters addressed to Santa Fe, and to let him know if anyone used the telegraph." Eve felt sick. They were trapped. "But," Martha said, a small, grim smile playing on her lips, "that wind this morning was something fierce. It seems to have damaged the telegraph wire." She winked. "Line is dead. As for your letter..." She took the envelope Eve had prepared. The eastbound military pouch leaves in 1 hour. It does not go through the main depot. It goes straight to the fort. It will get to Santa Fe by tomorrow night. She looked Eve dead in the eye. It will cost $10. Eve understood. It was hazard pay. She pulled the money from her boot. Thank you. Do not thank me, Martha whispered, sliding the letter into a locked leather bag. I cannot stand Blackjack Reeves. Now get your man and ride north. Do not follow this road. He will be watching it. They rode out, the rain washing their tracks away. The letter was on its way. A small bit of insurance, but they knew, with the telegraph cut, that they were truly on their own. They had to get to Santa Fe. They had to deliver Arthur Finch's story in person. That night, they made a cold camp under a high, red bluff. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crystalline and cold. The sunset was a spectacular, bloody smear of orange and crimson across the western sky. They sat in silence, sharing a piece of hardtack. The events of the last few days piled on top of them: the chase, the fight, the surveyor, the small, vicious prejudices, and the unexpected kindness. A wolf howled. Far off, the sound a long, lonely cry of wildness and sorrow. Eve shivered, drawing her thin coat tighter. It was a sound that made her feel how truly small she was, how vast and dangerous this land was. Without thinking, driven by a simple, human need for contact in the face of that overwhelming loneliness, her hand moved across the small space between them. Her fingers found his hand. She laced her fingers through his. Kai's hand was rough, calloused, and warm. He tensed, surprised by the contact. He did not pull away. He looked at their joined hands. Then he slowly turned his hand over, his grip enclosing hers, his thumb rubbing a small, gentle circle on her cold knuckles. It was not a gesture of passion. It was a gesture of solidarity. It was an anchor in the vast, darkening wilderness. The faint, nervous vibration she had felt around him had stilled, replaced by a simple, undeniable need to be near him. They sat for a long time, watching the last of the red light die, their hands locked together. The hand he had held in the dark was now busy checking the cinch on Tahoe's Mustang. The intimacy of the cold night under the bluff had passed, unspoken, leaving a new, quiet understanding in its place. They were no longer two strangers. They were, Evelyn Callahan thought, partners. They rode for 2 days, pushing east, the land changing from scrub to high piñon forest. On the 3rd day after the telegraph station, they saw the rider. He was not a threat. He was Dine, a young man from Kai's Valley. He rode his horse to a lathered stop, shouting Kai's name. He spoke in rapid Dine, his face tight with urgency. Eve watched Kai's expression. It did not change, but he went very still, his gaze turning south, back toward the home he had left. The young man gestured wildly, his voice full of anger, before yanking his horse around and riding away. "What is it?" Eve asked, her stomach clenching. Kai stared at the horizon. "Tahoe," he said, his voice flat and hard. "My brother, he and his friends, they went after Reeves." "What do you mean?" "They were angry about the corn. They tried to raid a Voss supply wagon. Not for food, for payback." He closed his eyes for a brief second. Reeves was waiting. It was a trap. Tahoe's friends were caught. My brother, he is hiding, but Reeves is hunting him. My grandmother, she is alone. The moral weight was immediate and absolute. His family was in direct, mortal danger because of a fight he had brought to their home. "You have to go back," Eve said instantly. "Go, I will be fine. I am close enough. I can follow the main road." Kai did not answer. He nudged his pinto, leading her up a high, wind-swept ridge that overlooked the entire territory. From the summit, they could see the world split in two. To the south, miles distant, was the faint, hazy line of his ancestral valley. To the north, the blue, jagged line of the mountains that guarded the path to Santa Fe. He stopped the horse and dismounted, looking south. I must go to him. Kai said it was not a question. If Reeves catches him, Judge Mercer will hang him before the sun sets. I know, Eve said, her voice quiet. Go, I will not stop you. He turned to her, his face a mask of conflict. You do not understand. The warrant for you is still active. That $100 bounty on me is now a $200 bounty. If I leave you on this road, you will not last a single day. You will be caught, or you will be killed. And Reeves will win. Everything. The photos, the ledger, it will be for nothing. Eve felt the sharp sting of frustration. That is my risk to take. It is not your responsibility. Your brother is your blood. You are my responsibility. Kai's voice was sharp. The first time he had raised it to her, the words hung in the charged air. I gave my word to Shima-sani. I gave my word to you. And I release you from it, Eve shot back, swinging down from the Mustang. This was their first real argument, a clash of two stubborn wills, both driven by a desperate sense of duty. I will not be the reason your brother dies. I have been on my own my entire life. I can handle myself. Alone? Kai's voice was incredulous. Alone is how you ended up framed in Winslow. Alone is how you would have died on that bridge. You are smart, Evelyn, but you do not know these men, and you do not know this land. And you do not know me, she retorted, her face flushed with anger and fear. I am not a child to be protected. I am a partner in this. My father died because he was alone and no one stood with him. I will not do that to you, and I will not let you sacrifice Tahoe for me. I am not sacrificing anyone, Kai said, his voice lowering, the anger replaced by a cold calculation. He stared at the two paths, south and north, a man caught in an impossible vice. You are right. To choose one path is to lose the other. So we must make a new path. Together. He walked to her horse and unstrapped her satchel. What are you doing? She asked. The ledger, he said. Give it to me. Warily, she handed him the thin, copied book. He took it, his face grim. Then, with a deliberate, steady hand, he tore the booklet in half. Kai, she gasped, horrified. Have you gone mad? He handed her the first half of the pages. You keep these, the maps, the survey coordinates, the payout amounts. He tucked the second half, the one containing the names of the bribed officials and headmen, inside his own shirt. I do not understand, she said. We are splitting the key, he explained, his voice urgent. Reeves wants the ledger. He wants you. He thinks we have one set of proof, but we have three. He tapped his chest. I have the names. If I am caught, all they find is a list. It means nothing without your pages. He pointed to her satchel. You have the maps. If you are caught, all they find are numbers. They do not have the names to connect them to. And the photographs, Eve whispered, understanding. The truth box evidence. Exactly, Kai said. You keep the photographs, and you keep the story of Arthur Finch. I will keep the names. We are splitting the target. If one of us is caught, the other still holds half the key. One of us must get through. On one of us, what is your plan? Ganado, he said. The main trading post. It is the largest hub between here and the fort. There is a field market today. Tahoe. He is reckless. He will be there. He thinks he can hide in the crowd, and Reeves will be there too, looking for him. Kai, that is a trap, she said, her blood running cold. It is a meeting, Kai corrected her. I will find Tahoe and get him out. While I am doing that, you will do what you do best. You will tell the truth. Ganado was a sprawling, chaotic vortex of humanity. It was not a town, just a massive, dusty clearing centered on the thick-walled trading post. Hundreds of dine, settlers, freighters, and soldiers mingled, their wagons and horses creating a fortress of chaos. Blankets were spread on the ground, piled high with silver jewelry, vibrant rugs, tools, and sacks of corn. "We meet at the cistern in 1 hour," Kai said, his voice low. "Do not be late, and do not draw attention until you must." He slipped off his pinto and vanished into the crowd, his movements as fluid and unseen as water sinking into sand. Eve clutched her satchel, her heart hammering. She stayed on the edge of the crowd, scanning, her eyes searching. Then she saw him. Blackjack Reeves. He was not hiding. He was standing on the bed of a massive freight wagon, a stack of 50-pound sacks of flour and sugar piled high behind him. He was smiling, his arms open wide. "A gift," Reeves boomed, his voice projecting over the din. "From Silas Voss and the Voss Rail Company, a gift to our neighbors, the Dine, to show our friendship and good faith. Come take it." A crowd was gathering, drawn by the promise of free food. They were wary, their faces a mix of hunger, suspicion, and need. Eve saw Tahoe. He was lurking near a wool wagon, his young face a mask of pure, undirected fury, his hand on a knife. He was watching Reeves, a predator about to do something foolish. "We accept this gift, Mr. Reeves." A Dine headman stepped forward, his face impassive. Eve recognized him, an older man named Grey Nose. "We want no trouble here. We want peace." Reeves beamed, his smile triumphant. "See peace. That is all, mister. Voss wants. We are partners in this land." This was it. This was the lie, spoken in the open. Eve saw her father's face, pale and defeated, in a dark hotel room. She felt the turquoise on her wrist. Do not let it be for nothing. She stepped out of the crowd, walking into the open space before the wagon. "He is lying to you," she yelled. The entire market went silent. The haggling stopped. The laughter died. Every eye turned to her. Reeves's smile froze, then twisted into a snarl of pure hatred. "Well, well," he drawled. "Look who it is, the little thief." "I am not a thief," Eve said, her voice shaking but carrying, clear as a bell. "And he is not your partner. He is buying your silence with flour while his men steal your land." "She is raving," Reeves shouted. "She is a wanted criminal. She is lying." "Am I?" Eve's hand went to her satchel. She did not pull out the ledger. She pulled out the heavy, glass plate photographs. She held up the first one, the image of the true, ancient treaty line on the sandstone boulder. "This is the true marker, the one Haitian Yazzie knows, the one your fathers knew." A murmur went through the Dine in the crowd. They knew that rock. She held up the second one, the image of the raw Voss Survey stake. "And this is the new stake. The Voss stake moved 50 yards onto your grazing land." The murmur grew, becoming a low growl. She held up the last one, the close-up of the shovel marks and the sledgehammer print. "And this is the proof, the scrape of the white man's shovel, the mark of his hammer. They are digging up your boundaries in the night." The crowd surged forward, pressing in, their faces transformed from wary hunger to active fury. Tahoe, his personal vendetta forgotten, stared, his mouth open. Grey Nose, the headman who had accepted the flour, looked at the photographs, his face hardening. "Is this true?" he demanded of Reeves. Reeves's hand dropped to his gun. "It is a trick, like Caesar," he ordered the 2 men who were with him. "She brings trouble," another voice shouted. It was a different headman, a man who clearly feared Voss. "This is Kai Nez's doing. He brings this white woman here to start a war. He will ruin us. We want peace." The crowd divided instantly. Some shouted at Reeves, others shouted at Eve. Peace for silence. It was the old, terrible bargain. "Get her!" Reeves roared, jumping down from the wagon. Just as his men lunged, Kai appeared at Eve's side. He grabbed her arm. "Now." He did not run. He grabbed a handful of silver dollars from his pocket and threw them hard at the feet of a team of mules hitched to a nearby wagon. "Cut them loose," he roared to the driver. The driver, seeing Reeves's men drawing guns, did not hesitate. He slashed the traces. The mules, stung by the coins and spooked by the shouting, bolted. The wagon careened, smashing into the crowd. It was pure chaos. People screamed, diving for cover. In that one moment of confusion, Kai threw Eve onto the Mustang, swung onto his own Pinto, and they bolted, riding low and fast, vanishing into the maze of wagons as Reeves's men fired blindly into the air. They rode for hours, pushing the horses until the animals were lathered and trembling. They found shelter in a deep, narrow wash, hidden by cottonwoods. Kai was grim, his face dark. "That was foolish. You could have been shot." "It worked," Eve panted, sliding from the horse, her legs shaking. "They saw. They know he is a liar. They will not trust him now." "They also know you are here," Kai said. "And that headman, Gray, knows. He fears Reeves more than he loves the truth. He will trade our location for peace. We have to keep moving." He looked around, his eyes scanning the ridges. "I did not find Tahoe. He was there, but in the chaos. I lost him." The failure sat on him like a physical weight. Eve watched him, the bravado from the confrontation draining away, leaving only the bone-deep weariness and the ache of his failure. "Why?" he asked, not looking at her, his voice low. "Why do this? It is not your land. It is not your fight." Eve sank onto a flat rock, the adrenaline gone, leaving her shaking. She buried her face in her hands. "My father," she said, her voice muffled, "was a quartermaster at Fort Laramie. He was a good man. He believed in the army. He believed in the law." Kai waited, his silence an invitation. She looked up, her eyes bright and fierce, refusing to shed the tears that burned behind them. "The post commander. He was selling army rifles to renegades. Good Winchester repeaters, for gold." Kai's face did not change, but his eyes hardened. He knew the trade. "My father found the ledgers, the real ones. He did what I am doing." Her voice broke, just for a second. "He wrote a letter. He sent it to the Territorial Inspector General. He thought he was doing the right thing, the legal thing. He trusted the system." "What happened?" Kai asked softly. "The Inspector General was the commander's cousin," Eve said, her voice bitter as alkali dust. "The next day, my father was arrested. They found a case of stolen army pistols under his bunk. They said he was the one selling the weapons. They court-martialed him. It took 1 day. Dishonorable discharge. And then, he was a broken man. He shot himself in a cheap hotel room in Omaha. 2 weeks later," she was not crying. It was an old, cold anger that fueled her. "They called him a thief. My mother and I. We were disgraced. We had nothing. He was framed. He was alone, and no one believed him. I am not letting that happen again." She looked at Kai, her gaze unwavering. "I am not dying a fool, and I am not running." Kai sat next to her. He did not touch her. He just sat, sharing the small patch of shade. He let her story settle in the hot, dry air. "Your father was a brave man," Kai said finally. "He was a dead man." Eve replied, "He was not a fool." Kai continued, his voice quiet but firm. "His mistake was not in the telling. His mistake was in trusting the wrong people, and in being alone. We will not make that mistake." The dynamic between them changed. They were no longer guide and client. They were no longer protector and protected. They were two halves of a key. As they rode, he taught her. "Look," he would say, pointing. "The tracks are fresh. 3 riders. 1 horse is limping. They are pushing too hard." He was teaching her to see the land not as a map, but as a story. In the evenings, She taught him. She read from her half of the ledger, and from the draft of the letter she had sent. This is important. Affidavit. That is a sworn statement. On paper. Corroboration. That means other people supporting the story. Like Arthur Finch. Like the photos. Kai listened, absorbing the legal language as if it were a new tracking skill. Good, he said. Strong words. 2 days after Ganado, they found their chance to get another witness. They were skirting a place called Redwater Well, one of the few reliable public wells in the region, marked on every survey map. They heard shouting. 2 families, settlers in 2 canvas-topped wagons, were being turned away by 3 of Voss's men, not Reeves, just hired hands.
This is Voss land!
One of the men was yelling, waving a rifle.
The well is private. Move on!
We have been watering here for 3 years, the settler. A man in overalls protested, his face desperate. Our cattle are dying.
Not our problem.
Kai and Eve watched from the ridge. More witnesses. Eve whispered, more people who need help. Kai replied. He looked at her. This time, we do not run. They rode down the slope. Not fast, but with a purpose that was unmistakable. The 3 Voss men turned, surprised, their hands going to their pistols. What is this, an Indian sideshow? One of them laughed nervously. This is a public well, Eve said, her voice clear and carrying. She had Tahoe's rifle across her lap, and she held it steady. She was not shaking this time. This is private property, the gunman snarled.
We got papers.
We got photographs, Eve countered, bluffing hard. Of this well, and the original survey map that lists it as public domain. And I, Kai said, his voice dangerously quiet, his pinto sidestepping. I am just tired of men like you. The 3 gunmen looked at Kai, his rifle resting easily on his pommel. They looked at Eve, her gaze cold and steady. They looked at the angry, desperate settler, who had now raised his own shotgun. It was 3 against 3.
This ain't worth our pay,
the leader muttered, spitting in the dust.
The whole damn territory is going crazy.
They mounted up and rode off. The settler, a man named Peters, stared at them, his face slack with relief. I do not know how to thank you. You can thank us in Santa Fe, Eve said, pulling out her notebook. I need your name. I need you to tell the marshal what happened here today, that Voss's men denied you water from a public well. The man's wife, Clara, stepped forward, her eyes fierce.
We will. They killed 2 of our cows.
We will tell him. My name is Clara Peters. We will be there. They had another witness. They left the Peters family watering their stock and pushed east. The land was changing again, rising into a series of jagged, black volcanic hills. The sky, which had been clear, was darkening. Not with rain, but with a strange electric tension. What is this place? Eve asked, her skin prickling, the hair on her arms lifting. The Lightning Hills, Kai said, his voice hushed. The rock draws the strike. My grandmother says it is where the thunder beings practice. We do not come here often. As if summoned, a jagged fork of lightning, silent and violet, split the sky in the distance. There was no thunder. We have to cross it, Kai said. It is the last barrier before the high road to Santa Fe. They rode into the dark, twisted maze of basalt. The air was so charged it hummed. The turquoise on Eve's wrist felt strangely warm. Another bolt of lightning struck, closer this time, hitting a high black peak. It was followed, 5 seconds later, by a low, powerful crack of thunder that shook the very ground beneath them. The storm was coming. The real one. They were exposed, in the most dangerous place they could be, and Reeves was somewhere behind them, closing the net. The world was about to explode. The first massive, cold drops of rain struck them as they cleared the basalt hills. The sky, a churning mass of violet and black, was no longer threatening. It was attacking. A jagged fork of lightning struck a pinnacle to their right, the explosion of thunder instantaneous, a physical blow that shook the ground. "We have to get off the high ground," Kai yelled over the rising shriek of the wind. The rain turned from drops to a solid, driving wall of water, cold as ice, reducing visibility to 20 yards. The dry, cracked earth became a slick, running sheet of red mud. Then, behind them, a sound, a shout, barely audible. Kai reined in. His head tilted. He saw them. 4 riders, dark shapes in the gray curtain of rain, cresting the hill they had just left. "Reeves!" Eve screamed, her heart seizing. "How?"
Gray knows. He made his choice,
Kai said, his voice grim. "He traded us for flour." Reeves and his men were pushing their horses hard, closing the distance.
This way.
Kai grabbed the reins of her Mustang, pulling her horse with his. He plunged off the game trail, down a steep, rocky embankment that was already becoming a waterfall. Eve clung to the saddle, her horse sliding and stumbling, but Kai did not slow. They landed in the bottom of a wide wash. It was not dry. A muddy, brown river, already a foot deep, was churning through it, carrying debris and tumbling rocks.
"We follow the water,"
Kai shouted.
"It will hide our tracks."
They plunged into the torrent. The water was shockingly cold, pulling at the horse's legs. Kai's pinto, bred for this land, moved with a steady, grudging purpose. Eve's Mustang, Tahoe's horse, was terrified, its eyes rolling. A shot cracked. The sound flattened the deluge. A bullet whined past Eve's head.
"Keep moving,"
Kai yelled. He pulled his rifle free from its scabbard. Reeves and his men were on the bank above them, firing down. They were in a trap, a long, watery shooting gallery. "They have us," Eve cried, her body low over the horse's neck.
"No, they do not."
Kai spurred his pinto forward, dragging her horse with him. The wash narrowed, the basalt walls rising sheer on both sides. Another shot, and the pinto grunted, stumbling. It had been hit, a flesh wound on its flank. The horse recovered, but it was slowing. Reeves and his men were in the wash now, behind them, gaining. The walls of the canyon seemed to close in, and then Kai saw it. He yanked the horses to the left, up a steep, muddy bank, into a dark alcove recessed into the cliff. "A hogan!" Eve gasped. It was larger than his grandmother's, an old, six-sided ceremonial hogan. Its door long gone, but its walls thick and solid. It had been built high on the bank, safe from the flash floods.
"Inside,"
Kai roared. He jumped from the pinto, pulling his saddlebag and rifle.
"Leave the horses, get inside."
Eve scrambled from the Mustang, grabbing her own satchel, and plunged into the earthy darkness of the shelter. The horses, terrified by the gunfire and the lightning, huddled in the alcove, their flanks steaming. "Stay down," Kai commanded, dropping to one knee in the doorway. He was a dark silhouette against the gray, driving rain. The world exploded in light. A bolt of lightning struck the rim of the canyon directly above them. The crack of thunder was so loud it was a physical pain. And in that flash of brilliant, violet light, Eve saw Reeves and his 3 men dismounting, charging up the muddy bank on foot, their faces contorted with effort, rifles raised. "They are coming. I see them." Kai's voice was deathly calm. The first 2 men hit the slickest part of the mud bank, a steep, 10-foot slope. They were heavy, their boots clumsy. Kai did not fire. He put 2 fingers to his mouth and let out a piercing, high-pitched whistle. The pinto, trained to the sound and already spooked, reared, its front hooves lashing out. At the same moment, the Mustang, in a blind panic, bolted sideways, slamming into the 2 men. It was over in a second. One man, his feet sliding out from under him, tumbled backward with a scream, disappearing into the churning brown water of the wash. The second man, knocked off balance by the horse, slid down the bank, his rifle flying from his hands. He landed hard against a rock and did not move. Reeves and the last man, who had been coming more cautiously from the side, dove for cover, disappearing behind a tumble of black rocks. A bullet slammed into the thick juniper log of the doorframe. Inches from Kai's head, he fired back, not at Reeves, but at the rock above him. The shot sent a spray of stone shrapnel down. "Oh, you are alone, Reeves," Kai yelled. "Not for long," Reeves bellowed back, his voice raw with fury. The last man, trying to get a better angle, broke cover, running low, but the ground was not solid. The rain had hidden a shallow gully. He stepped into empty air. His ankle twisted with a sickening crack, and he went down, his rifle skittering across the mud. He cried out, a sharp, terrible sound of pain.
"It is over," Kai shouted. "Leave, or I will put the next one in you."
There was a long silence. Just the roar of the rain. Reeves was pinned. He was alone, his men gone or broken. "This is not over, Nez." Reeves's voice was a promise of pure hatred, floating through the storm. "You hear me? This is just the beginning. I am bringing the whole damn company down on you. You are a dead man." A final, desperate shot slammed into the mud near the doorway. Then they heard him scrambling, sliding down the bank. A moment later, the sound of a single horse, galloping away, was swallowed by the storm. Silence fell, absolute and heavy, filled only by the sound of the rain and the rushing, angry water in the wash. Kai stayed in the doorway for a full minute, his rifle steady, scanning the opposite bank. Then, slowly, he lowered the weapon. He let out a long breath and turned back into the darkness of the hogan. Eve was huddled against the back wall, her arms wrapped around her knees, her body shaking. It was not from fear. The terror had passed. This was a deep, bone-numbing cold. She was soaked to the skin, her clothes plastered to her, her teeth chattering so hard it sounded like they would break. "It is all right," Kai said, his voice dropping from the warrior's command to something low and concerned. "He is gone." I can't stop shaking," she stammered. He moved to her side, touching her shoulder. Her skin, even through the wet cloth, was ice. "Your coat," he said, his voice practical. He did not wait for her to obey. His hands were rough but efficient as he stripped the sodden, heavy coat from her shoulders. Her linen shirt beneath was useless, transparent and clinging.
"We need a fire."
He went back to the doorway, grabbing his saddlebag. He pulled out his dry bedroll. "Get this around you," he said, pushing the thick wool blanket at her. He turned his back, giving her a moment of privacy as she fumbled out of her wet shirt and wrapped the dry wool around her torso, cocooning herself. He set to work with his flint and steel. His hands were scraped and raw from the rocks, but they were steady. He found a small pile of dry tinder left by some long-ago traveler in a high, dry crevice of the hogan wall. It took him a long, agonizing 10 minutes, his knuckles white with effort. But finally, a small, weak spark caught. He blew on it gently, coaxing it, feeding it dry twigs from his pack. A small, smoky fire began to crackle in the central fire pit, its light pushing back the cold, wet gloom. Eve was still shivering, her body racked by violent tremors. He saw her face in the firelight. It was pale, her lips tinged with blue. He rummaged in his pack again and pulled out his small tin cup and a pouch of herbs. He filled the cup from his canteen, added a pinch of dried juniper leaves and a chunk of yucca root, and set it in the coals. "This is not good," he muttered. He sat beside her, chafing her icy hands between his own. "The cold has gotten into your bones." When the water was steaming, he pulled the cup from the fire, blowing on the bitter, piney brew to cool it. "Here, drink this." She was shaking too hard to hold the cup. Her hands fumbled, spilling the hot liquid. Be still, he commanded, his voice soft but firm. He put one arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. He held the tin cup to her lips, supporting her head. Small sips. She drank, coughing at the bitter, astringent taste, but it was hot. The heat spread from her throat to her stomach, a small, fragile core of warmth. He kept her tucked against him, sharing his own body heat, rubbing her arms through the wool blanket. Slowly, the violent bone-rattling shivers began to ease, subsiding into a deep trembling. "I thought he was going to," she whispered, her voice rough. "I thought—" "He is gone," Kai said, his voice a low rumble beside her ear. "No," she said, pulling back just enough to look at him. The firelight flickered in her wide, haunted eyes. "I thought I was going to watch him kill you. I thought I was going to watch you die, right there in the doorway, because of me." Her voice broke. "I trust you," she whispered, the confession raw and painful. "I let myself trust you, and I thought I was going to watch you die for it, just like my father." Kai's arm tightened around her. He said nothing, just let her words hang in the small, warm space. He fed another stick to the fire. "When I was a scout," he said at last, his voice so low she had to strain to hear him, "I was good at that." He gestured to the doorway, to the memory of the fight, the killing, the war. "I was better at it than any of them." He stared into the flames, his face hard. "My grandfather was a warrior. He fought the soldiers at Bosque Redondo. He fought everyone. He saw enemies in every shadow. When the fighting was over, he did not know how to stop. He did not know how to be anything else. He died in a cheap saloon, in a drunken brawl over a game of cards, over nothing." He looked at her, his eyes dark with a fear deeper than any Reeves could inspire. "I am afraid," he said, the words torn from him, "that this is all I am, that when this is over, when the last shot is fired, I will be just like him, a man who only knows how to fight, a man who brings the storm home." Eve's shaking had finally stopped. She reached out, her hand, now warm, and laid it on his bandaged arm. She felt the coiled strength there, the tension. "You are not," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "A man who only knows how to fight would have let me freeze. You are the man who rode back for me at the livery. You are the man who showed me the treaty stones. You are the man who brews tea in the dark and worries about his brother." He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. The fear in his eyes receded, replaced by a different, deeper intensity. The air in the hogan was no longer cold, but charged with the smoke, the scent of juniper, and the heat of their small fire. Eve's lips, still pale, curved in a small, trembling smile. She was exhausted, filthy, her hair matted with mud, wrapped in a rough wool blanket, and he had never seen anything more beautiful. "Well," she teased, her voice a husky whisper, barely audible above the drumming rain. "Aren't you gonna kiss me?" A slow, unguarded grin spread across Kai's face. It was the first time she had ever truly seen it, and it transformed him, wiping away the hardness, leaving only a deep, surprising warmth. "All night," he answered, his voice a low, soft rumble. "If you can handle it." He leaned in. He did not rush. He did not take. He brushed his lips against hers. A question. A pause in the storm. She answered by leaning into him, her cold, damp hand coming up to cup his jaw, her fingers tracing the line of his cheek. The kiss was not the desperate, frantic collision she might have expected. It was a slow, deep discovery. It was the taste of rain and smoke, the bitter herbs, and the salt of the long, hard ride. It was the solid, undeniable truth of two people who had seen the worst in each other's worlds and had chosen to stand, to stay, right here, together. It was a promise. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. "We go to Santa Fe," he whispered. "Together." "Together," She breathed. The fire burned low, the shadows in the hogan deepening. The rain fell, a steady, rhythmic drumming on the earth roof, a curtain of privacy drawn around the old, sacred shelter. In the cold, clean light of dawn, the world was washed new. The rain had stopped. The wash below was a placid, muddy ribbon. Eve woke first, warm and aching, still wrapped in the blanket. Kai was already at the doorway, a solid shape against the bright morning. He was dressed, his rifle in hand, staring at the ground. She joined him, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Good morning." He turned, his eyes meeting hers. The warmth of the night was still there, a steady, quiet light. "Good morning." He gestured to the threshold of the hogan. He had placed a small, neat pile of blue cornmeal on the ground. "For the holy people," he explained, "for giving us shelter." Eve glanced inside, at the ceremonial bundles tied with sinew on the western wall, objects she had known instinctively not to touch. He saw her look, and he nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her respect. "He'll be back," she said, her voice practical, looking at the muddy, torn landscape. "I know." He knelt, his gaze fixed on the earth near the rocks where Reeves had hidden. "He left this," he pointed, on the flat, black surface of a basalt rock. There was a deliberate, dark smear of charcoal, a circle, with a line through it. "What is it?" "A sign," Kai said, his voice grim. "He is not just coming back. He is calling them. It is a bounty hunter's mark. He is telling every man who can read it that the wanted man, me, is here. He is putting a price on our heads for every gun in the territory." The fragile peace of the morning shattered, but as Kai turned to saddle the pinto, checking the horse's wound, he froze. He walked to the edge of the wash, his eyes fixed on a set of tracks, nearly obliterated by the rain, but still visible in the fine silt. "What is it?" Eve asked, coming to his side. He did not speak. He just pointed. There were the tracks of Reeves's horse, and the tracks of the 3 other riders. And then there was a 5th set, a horse she did not recognize, but Kai did. "Tahoe," he said, his voice flat. "What, he was here during the fight?" "No," Kai said, his voice hard as the rock under his feet. He pointed to another set of tracks, slightly further down, the small, cloven hoof prints of a half-dozen cattle, their brands blurred but the shape unmistakable. He was with them. Before the storm hit, his tracks. They are mixed with Reeves's men. He was riding with them. Eve felt the blood drain from her face. "They are not just hunting him," she whispered, the pieces clicking into place. "They lured him in." "To get money for his wedding," Kai said, his voice hollow. He had put the story together, the restless anger, the talk of silver. "Voss is not just hunting him. He bought him. He's using him to rustle Voss's own cattle, a staged theft, to make the Dine look like thieves, to justify everything." Kai stood, caught between the dawn and the dark, the woman he had just sworn to protect. The new, fragile love he had found in the storm was now set against the brother he had sworn to save. The knife had 2 blades, and they were both pointing at his heart. The journey to Santa Fe was a quiet torment. The intimacy of the storm, the warmth of the confession and the kiss, was buried under the cold, hard reality of Tahoe's betrayal. Kai Nez rode in a grim silence, his face a mask of stone, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He was a man split in 2, riding toward justice for his people, while knowing his own brother had helped forge the weapon being used against them. Evelyn Callahan rode beside him. She did not speak. She did not offer comfort or ask questions. There was nothing to say. She just stayed, her presence a steady, silent anchor against the grief she knew he was feeling. They reached Santa Fe in the late afternoon. It was not a raw, clapboard town like Winslow. It was old, the streets narrow, the buildings made of thick, rounded adobe that seemed to grow from the brown earth. It was a city of power, shadow, and secrets. They saw Silas Voss before they even reached the marshal's office. He was stepping out of a polished carriage in front of the finest hotel, laughing, dressed in a tailored suit, looking every inch the Eastern senator. He was not a frontier villain. He was a statesman, shaking hands, exuding power. He did not even see them. Two dusty, exhausted riders on tired horses. The federal marshal's office was in the same imposing adobe building that housed the territorial court. The shadow of Judge Mercer was long here. They met Marshal Egan. He was a man with weary eyes, a drooping mustache, and a badge that looked too heavy for his shirt. He was skeptical, a man who had heard too many wild stories. "We received your letter, ma'am," he said to Eve, his voice a dry rasp. "And we found the surveyor, Finch. He is in military custody, and his story, it holds water. So, let us see what you have brought." Eve untied her satchel. She laid her evidence on his desk, piece by piece. First, her half of the ledger, the maps and figures. Second, the heavy glass photographic plates, the truth box images of the moved treaty stones and the sledgehammer print. Third, her own written affidavit, sworn and signed, detailing the frame-up in Winslow, the attack at the bridge, and the fight at Redwater Well. Egan examined the photographs, holding them up to the light. This is damning," he muttered. "Marshal." Kai spoke for the first time, his voice low. "We also have the names of the men Voss and Mercer paid. The other half of this ledger." As Kai reached into his shirt, the office door opened. Judge Mercer entered. He was exactly as Eve had imagined, tall, silver-haired, dressed in a fine black frock coat. His voice was not a frontier bark. It was a smooth, educated baritone. "Marshal Egan," Mercer said, smiling, though it did not reach his eyes. "I am glad you are here. You have saved me the trouble of a pursuit. I am here to take custody of your prisoner." Egan looked up, confused. "Prisoner. This man is a federal witness." "This man," Mercer said, pulling a familiar poster from his coat, "is Kai Nez, a wanted fugitive for horse theft, assault, and threatening an agent of the territorial court. That agent," he nodded, and Blackjack Reeves stepped into the doorway behind him, "is Mr. Jim Reeves, who is here to identify him." Reeves was grinning, his arm in a crude sling, his eyes burning with triumph. "That is him. That is the horse thief." Egan looked at the warrant, then at Kai. "Judge, this warrant seems convenient." "It is legal," Mercer said, his voice turning to steel. "The territory's claim supersedes your witness protection. Arrest him." Two deputies, their faces grim, stepped forward and took Kai's rifle. Kai did not resist. He met Eve's eyes, his expression unreadable. "Wait," Eve said, her voice rising. "This is a lie. It is a frame-up." "Miss Callahan," Mercer said, turning his cold attention to her. "A word, please, in my chambers, for your own benefit." He led her, protesting, into an adjoining office. Leaving Kai with the deputies, Mercer closed the door. The room was opulent, smelling of leather and expensive cigars. "You are an intelligent woman, Evelyn," he said, his tone almost paternal. "You are in over your head. You have aligned yourself with a violent, primitive man. This evidence of yours," he waved a dismissive hand, "is nothing. Photographs, a list of names, the ravings of a sun-crazed surveyor, it will all be dismissed." He leaned on his desk. "Here is my offer. You walk away, you take your horse, and you ride back east. You forget this unfortunate business. In return, I will see to it that Mr. Nez's charges are misplaced. A fine, time served. He will be released. You save his life." "And if I refuse?" Eve asked, her voice a low, cold tremor. Then he will hang, Mercer said simply, all pretense of kindness gone. And you, my dear, will be charged as his accomplice. I will ruin you. I will destroy your reputation, your credibility, and your freedom. You will both be buried. Eve stared at him. The full, crushing weight of the system, his system, pressing down on her. She was dismissed, pushed back into the main office, her mind reeling. She saw Kai, his hands now bound in front of him, being led down a hall toward the cells. A woman in a deputy's uniform, her badge marking her as a federal deputy marshal, stepped into Eve's path. She was young, Hispanic, with sharp and intelligent eyes and a face that showed no fear. Her name tag read, Ruiz. "He is a monster," Deputy Clara Ruiz whispered, her voice fast and low, nodding toward Mercer's closed door. "He is winning," Eve said, her voice hollow. "He gets sloppy when he is angry," Ruiz said. "Reeves, too. They think no one here speaks their language. Reeves sent a telegraph from Winslow after he ran you out. He was bragging, and he was demanding his money." Ruiz pressed a folded piece of paper into Eve's hand. "This is a copy of the wire. Mercer paid him $200 for services rendered, specifically for the corn stampede." Eve read the words. It was the link, the proof that the attack on Kai's family was a paid, orchestrated move by the court. "Mercer is convening a hearing," Ruiz said, "right now, in his courtroom. He is transferring Kai to the Yuma Territorial Prison. It is a death sentence. Once he is on that train, he will disappear." "We cannot let him," Eve said, her mind igniting. "It is a closed hearing. His court, his rules." "Not if the press is there," Eve said, a desperate, brilliant idea forming. "Where is that courtroom?" Eve slammed the doors open. Judge Mercer was at his bench. Kai stood before him in chains. Reeves was in the witness box, lying, his voice smug. A bored court reporter was the only other person present. "Stop this!" Eve shouted. Mercer's head snapped up, his face turning purple with rage. "You are in contempt. Miss Callahan, get out." "I demand this hearing be held in public," Eve announced, her voice ringing in the empty room. "I am a correspondent for the Prescott Courier, and I am reporting on a conspiracy to defraud the public, a story the Santa Fe New Mexican is very interested in." She pointed to the startled reporter. "And this court reporter is now my witness." Mercer was trapped. A public fight was bad, but silencing the press looked worse. "This is a simple bond hearing," he roared. "Then hold it in public," Eve challenged. "In the plaza where everyone can see your justice." The plaza, 30 minutes later, was a seething mass of people. Word had spread like fire, a showdown between a corrupt judge, a Navajo warrior, and a city woman. Mercer stood on the steps of the courthouse, his face a mask of fury. Kai stood beside him, chained. "This is a territorial matter," Mercer shouted, trying to control the crowd. "This man is a fugitive." "He is a liar," Eve pointed at Reeves. "And Judge Mercer is his partner. They are stealing land." "She is the liar," Reeves shouted back, his face red. "She is a railroad thief and a savage's woman." "He is the one who left me to die." The crowd parted. Arthur Finch, the surveyor, marched forward, flanked by 2 armed soldiers from the fort. He was pale, but his voice was strong. "That man," he pointed directly at Reeves, "abandoned me in the desert because I would not falsify my survey lines, and he—" Finch turned, pointing a shaking finger at Judge Mercer. "Is the one who sent the telegraph ordering me to do it?" A collective gasp went up from the crowd. "And there is more." Deputy Ruiz stepped forward, holding the telegram. "We have a wire from Reeves to Mercer, demanding payment for destroying the Nez family cornfield." She read it aloud. The crowd, a mix of settlers, townsfolk, and dine, began to growl. Eve held up her glass plates. The local newspaper photographer, smelling the story of the year, ran forward, taking them. He held them up to the sky, one by one. "So, look," Eve shouted. "The proof, the move treaty stones, the hammer marks, they are lying to you all." "This is a circus," a new voice, smooth as silk, cut through the noise. A man in a three-piece suit, carrying a fine leather briefcase, stepped onto the stairs. "I am Mr. Silas Voss's attorney from Denver, and this entire proceeding is a farce." He turned to the crowd, his voice projecting calm, reasonable authority. "This woman," he gestured to Eve, "is a known agitator, a yellow journalist using her feminine wiles to confuse the public. She has manipulated this poor, misguided native," he said, gesturing to Kai, "into a violent fantasy to attack the very progress this territory depends on." "He is not manipulated," Eve cried. "He is a savage, and she is a manipulative siren," the lawyer declared. "No, she is not," a woman's voice, sharp and angry, came from the crowd. Clara Peters, the woman from the Red Water Well, pushed forward, her husband right behind her. "That man's gunmen, Voss's men, denied my family water from a public well. This woman and Mr. Nez stood up for us. They saved my children." "And I saw Reeves cut the telegraph wire," another voice. Martha, the postmistress, stepped out, her face stern. "He tried to stop her letters. He tried to silence her." A local innkeeper pushed forward. Reeves, threatened to burn my hotel down if I gave her a room." The crowd surged, the chain of testimony complete, their anger now focused. Mercer saw his power evaporating. He was trapped. He looked at Reeves, at the lawyer, at the soldiers protecting Finch. He made a desperate, final move. He slammed his gavel down on the stone stair. "Order, order. This is not a trial. The warrant for Kai Nez is valid. His guilt or innocence is not the question. He is a fugitive, and he is remanded to the Yuma prison, without bond." He was sending Kai away, to be killed, to be lost in the system. The crowd roared. The deputies moved to take Kai. Eve made her choice. She walked straight up the steps, past the lawyer, and stood directly in front of Judge Mercer. "Then you must arrest me, too," she said, her voice clear and carrying. Mercer sneered. "On what charge?" "Accomplice," Eve said. "The lawyer said it. Mr. Reeves said it. I am his accomplice. If you take him, you take me." She turned and stood shoulder to shoulder with Kai. She held out her wrists. "Arrest me, Judge," she challenged him, her voice ringing across the plaza. "Let everyone see. Let the newspapers write it down. You are arresting the woman who brought the proof, right along with the man you framed." The crowd was silent, waiting. The reporter was writing so fast his pencil smoked. Mercer was shaking with rage. He was utterly defeated. He looked at the deputy. "Take them," he hissed, his voice venomous. "Both of them. Contempt of court. Put them in the cell." The deputy, his hands shaking, locked a cuff on Eve's wrist and linked the short chain to the one Kai already wore. They were bound together. Late that night, the cell was cold and dark. They sat on a stone bench, the adrenaline gone, leaving only exhaustion. "Your father would be proud," Kai said, his voice rough. "We are not dead yet," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. A sound came from the high barred window, a desperate scrape. Kai was on his feet in an instant, the chain rattling, pulling Eve with him. He stared into the darkness outside. "Tahoe." His brother's face appeared, a pale oval in the moonlight, his fingers gripping the bars. Tahoe was weeping. "Kai, I am sorry," he choked out. "I did not know, I swear, I did not know what it was." "You rode with him." Kai's voice was dead, empty of all emotion. "He said it was just work," Tahoe cried, his voice breaking. He said Voss wanted some cattle moved. For a new brand. He paid me $50. For the wedding. Kai, I just wanted the money. I did not know about her. About the fight. I did not know they were hunting you. I just wanted $50, Kai said, the words falling like stones. You helped him. You gave him the excuse he needed. You betrayed us. For $50. The accusation hung in the cold night air. The family rift, the one Kai had feared, was now a canyon, torn open by his brother's choice. The sky over Santa Fe was a sheet of bruised, angry gray. The heavy, oppressive silence in the cell had lasted all night, broken only by the distant, hollow echo of Tahoe's weeping as he disappeared into the darkness. Kai Nez had not spoken a word since. He sat on the stone bench, his wrist chained to Evelyn Callahan's. But he was 1,000 miles away, a man hollowed out by his brother's confession. Eve sat beside him, the cold iron a stark reminder of their shared fate. She did not try to fill the silence. There were no words for this. When Deputy Clara Ruiz unlocked the cell door, the air that drifted in was cold and electric, smelling of ozone. "It is time," Ruiz said, her voice grim. "Mercer is not waiting. He has convened the full territorial court. He is trying to push the Yuma transfer through before the federal circuit judge can intervene. He is going to finish this." They were marched back out onto the steps of the courthouse. The plaza was a sea of faces, larger than the day before. A tense, silent crowd gathered under the threatening sky. They were not a mob. They were witnesses, drawn by the scent of a reckoning. The newspaper reporter was there, his pencil already flying, the local photographer fiddling with his bulky camera. Judge Mercer was at his bench, which had been moved onto the top landing, a throne of dark wood. Silas Voss and his Denver lawyer stood to one side, confident. Marshal Egan stood on the other, his face rigid with frustration. "This court is resumed," Mercer's voice boomed, cracking with strain. "We are here to formalize the transfer of the fugitive, Kai Nez, to the federal penitentiary at Yuma on the valid charges of horse theft and assault." "And we have new evidence," Blackjack Reeves shouted, stepping forward. He was clean, his arm now in a neat, black sling, a parody of a wounded lawman. "We've found the man he shot." One of Reeves's men, the one who had cried out in the mudslide, was carried forward. He sat, his face pale, his ankle massively swollen. "He will testify." Reeves declared that Kai Nez shot him in the back, while he was trying to flee. "That is a lie." Eve lunged forward, the chain yanking Kai with her. "He fell. We watched him fall. We never fired at that man." "Silence. Miss Callahan," Mercer roared, banging his gavel. "You are in contempt. We have an eyewitness. We have this man's testimony. It is done. I am signing the order." Kai just stared, his eyes dead. The fight had gone out of him. Tahoe's betrayal had been the final blow. "You will sign nothing." The voice was not loud. It was as old as the earth, as dry as juniper bark, but it carried across the entire plaza, silencing the crowd, silencing the judge. The sea of people parted. Shima Sani walked forward. She was not alone. Behind her walked Hastian Yazi, leaning on his stick, his eyes as clear as the high desert sky. And behind them, a silent delegation of 20 Dine headmen, men who had seen Eve's photographs at Ganado, men who had finally chosen a side. They had ridden all night, their faces grim and resolute. "Grandmother," Kai whispered. The word was a breath, a prayer. Life flooded back into his face. Shima Sani did not look at her grandson. Her eyes, bright and piercing, were fixed on Judge Mercer. She stopped at the base of the steps. "You speak of law," she said, her English precise and clear. "You speak of paper warrants. Your paper is filled with lies." She raised her hand. It was not a weapon. It was a long, knotted cord of yucca fiber, dark with age, tied into the knots. like the beads of a rosary, were small, carved pieces of wood and polished, notched stones. "This is our warrant," she said, her voice ringing with an authority that dwarfed Mercer's. "This is the line. This is the treaty, made with the grandfathers of the first soldiers. This shows the springs. This shows the canyons. This is the land." The Denver lawyer let out a short, scoffing laugh. "Your Honor, is this court admitting evidence of beads and string?" Masani ignored him. She slowly, deliberately, pulled one of the markers free from the cord. It was a flat, dark stone, almost black, with a distinct, archaic symbol carved into its center. "This is the stone," she said, holding it high. "It is the mark of the Standing Rock clan. It has marked the boundary of our grazing land for 500 winters. It is the stone you dug up and moved." Eve gasped, her mind flashing back to the glass plate. "The photograph," she cried, turning to the local photographer. "My picture, the one of the treaty stone, quickly." The photographer, his eyes wide with the magnitude of the moment, fumbled for the plate. "Deputy Ruiz," Eve shouted, her voice sharp with sudden, desperate hope. "The evidence! Look at the evidence!" Ruiz stepped forward, her hand on her own sidearm. "Marshal, this is a federal matter. I demand this evidence be entered." The photographer held the heavy glass plate up against the dark, gray sky. Masani held her ancient stone high, the symbol carved into the stone in her hand, and the symbol captured in the light on the glass plate were identical. "The photograph," Masani said quietly, "does not know how to lie." A low, deep growl rippled through the plaza. The Denver lawyer's smile vanished. He stared at the plate, then at the stone, his face pale. "It is true, she is telling the truth." The shout came from the crowd. Tahoe, his face streaked with dirt and tears, shoved his way through, stumbling past the deputies. "Tahoe, no," Kai said, his voice raw. "I must," Tahoe gasped, his chest heaving. He fell to his knees at the bottom of the steps, facing not the judge, but the crowd. He came to me." Tahoe pointed a shaking finger at Blackjack Reeves. "He said he had work. He offered me $50. The crowd murmured. $50 was a fortune. "He said Mr. Voss needed cattle moved, just moved to a new pasture. He said it was just work. I wanted the money for my wedding." Tahoe's voice broke in a sob. "But he lied. It was a setup. He had me sign a paper, a bill of sale, making it look like I had stolen them. And then, the corn." Tahoe looked up, his eyes meeting Kai's. "It was him. Kai, he told his men to light the brush. He told them to stampede the cattle through the corn. It was never about me. He did it to smoke you out," he said, "to frame our people, to give him the excuse to come into our valley." He lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. "I was a fool. I was weak. I am sorry. My brother, I am sorry." The confession hung in the air, absolute and damning. The Denver lawyer snapped his briefcase shut. This is a conspiracy," he sputtered, looking at Silas Voss. "A circus. I will not stake my reputation on this. This backwater melodrama, Mr. Voss. You are on your own." He turned, pushed his way through the crowd, and was gone. Silas Voss stood alone, his fine Eastern suit suddenly looking foolish, his face a mask of pale, sweating shock. Marshal Egan stepped forward, his duty clear. He placed his hand on his holster. "Judge Mercer," he said, his voice cold iron, "I am placing you under federal investigation for conspiracy to defraud the public. I am stripping you of your authority. Hand me the gavel." Mercer, his face as gray as the sky, looked at the crowd. He looked at Voss. He looked at his deputies, who were pointedly looking away from him. He was alone. But Blackjack Reeves was not a man of law. He was not a man of politics. He was a creature of violence, and he was not going to prison. He did not run for the judge. He did not run for Voss. He ran for the street. Shoving Hasty and Yazzie to the ground, Reeves bolted from the steps, a desperate, animalistic sprint. He was headed for the nearest horse, a big roan tied to the hitching rail, its saddle holding a coiled lariat.
"He is escaping!"
the reporter screamed. Reeves had his boot in the stirrup. "Ruiz," Kai said, his voice flat. "The key." Deputy Ruiz did not hesitate. Her hand was already at her belt. She unlocked the cuff on Kai's wrist. The iron clattered against the stone. Kai was free. He did not draw a gun. He did not shout. He took 2 long, fluid steps. Reeves was swinging his leg over the saddle. Kai grabbed the coiled lariat from the saddle horn. Reeves dug his heels into the roan's flanks. The horse bolted, but the rope was already in Kai's hand. With a single, beautiful, economic motion and art learned over 1,000 nights on the high mesas, a skill as natural to him as breathing, Kai spun the loop once over his head and sent it singing through the air. It was a perfect throw. The loop opened, sailed, and dropped neatly over Reeves's head and shoulders, pinning his arms, including the one in the sling, to his body. Kai did not pull. He did not need to. He simply wrapped the end of the rope around the thick adobe corner of the courthouse steps and held on. The roan hit the end of the rope. Reeves was yanked clean from the saddle, flying backward through the air. He crashed to the ground in the middle of the plaza with a sickening, bone-jarring thud that echoed in the sudden silence. He did not move. For a beat, the entire plaza was frozen. And then, a sound. It started as a single shout, then grew into a deafening, cascading roar of victory. Marshal Egan and 2 other deputies were on Reeves, dragging the winded, groaning man to his feet. "Take him, and take Mercer, and take Voss," Egan commanded. His authority absolute. "Put them in the cells, the federal cells." He turned to the crowd, his voice booming over the cheers. "This hearing is concluded by the authority of the United States Federal Court. An immediate injunction is placed on all Voss rail and cattle land transactions. A full federal review of all treaty lines in this territory will commence immediately. And the people of Canyon de Chelly," he looked directly at Shumasani, "are under the protection of the United States Marshal Service. Effective now." It was over. The dust kicked up by the roan began to settle. A fine, misty rain, more cleansing than a storm, began to fall. Eve stood on the steps, the broken cuff still dangling from her wrist. She was shaking, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her weak-kneed. My Kai walked back up the steps. His face was not triumphant. It was weary, but it was calm. He stopped in front of her. They did not speak. They had been to the edge of the world and back. He reached out and, with a hand that was still scraped from the hogan, he gently touched the turquoise bracelet on her arm. He turned. Tahoe was still on his knees at the bottom of the steps, his face buried in his hands, too ashamed to look up. Kai walked down the steps, past his grandmother, past the cheering crowd. He stood over his younger brother. Tahoe looked up, his eyes a ruin of guilt and self-hatred. I am nothing. I betrayed us." Kai looked at the boy who had been blinded by silver, and the man who had found the courage to tell the truth. He saw the wound. He saw the scar. He did not speak. He just reached down, grabbed Tahoe by the arms, and pulled him to his feet. He wrapped his arms around his brother, pulling him into a fierce, tight embrace. He held him in the middle of the plaza. As the family and the world watched, the canyon between them was closed. As Eve watched, a small, tired smile on her lips. A sound, louder than the crowd, louder than the rain, split the air. A final, magnificent crack of thunder that rolled across the sky. It was not a threat. It was an exclamation. And as the rumble faded, the heavy, dark ceiling of clouds tore apart. A single powerful beam of afternoon sun lanced through the gloom, striking the plaza, illuminating the wet adobe, making the ancient, rain-washed buildings gleam like new gold. The storm had broken, the turning point had passed. The ride back from Santa Fe was not a victory parade. It was a long, quiet migration, a shifting of weight from one world to another. The shackles were gone from their wrists, but the weight of what had happened, what had been lost and what had been won, settled on them like the fine, high desert dust. Tahoe rode with them. He had been given Tahoe's Mustang back by Marshal Egan, a practical, unspoken pardon. The young man who had left the valley vibrating with a restless, silver-hungry anger was gone. In his place was a quiet, hollowed-out man who rode 10 yards behind his brother, his gaze fixed on the ground, his shame a palpable thing. Kai and Evelyn Callahan rode side by side. The memory of the night in the storm-swept Hogan was a silent, charged space between them. They had confessed their deepest fears to one another, had found a desperate warmth in the dark, and then had been torn apart by Tahoe's betrayal and the raw, public light of the trial. Now, they were partners, bound by a shared victory, but the future was a vast, uncharted territory, as intimidating as the mesas rising before them. When they finally descended into the familiar, protective red rock arms of Canyon de Chelly, the valley felt different. The air was the same, scented with pinon and dust, but the people who emerged from their hogans were not the same. The young men, Tahoe's friends, the ones who had muttered and spat near Eve's feet, were silent. They stood near the empty, ruined cornfield, their hats in their hands. Their defiance was gone, replaced by a deep, watchful respect. Tahoe dismounted and walked past them, his face rigid, and disappeared into his small hogan. Pulling the blanket flap closed, Shima Sani emerged from her home, her small frame silhouetted against the firelight within. She looked at Kai, her gaze taking in his weariness, the new lines around his eyes. She looked at Eve, at the turquoise still tied to her wrist. "You are home," she said. It was a statement of fact, not just a welcome. She embraced Kai, her small, strong arms wrapping around his waist, a rare gesture of public affection. Then, she turned to Eve and placed a dry, wrinkled hand on her arm. "You have walked through the fire. Come, there is food." That night, the community gathered. It was not a celebration, but a council, the most important one the valley had held in a generation. The headmen who had ridden to Santa Fe sat near Hasty Yazzie, their faces illuminated by the tall, crackling bonfire. Hasty Yazzie was the first to speak, his voice a low rumble. "We have won a great battle. We used the white man's truth box." He nodded to Eve's camera. "And our own ancient truth." He nodded to Shima Sani's marker cord. "To strike a blow." He leaned forward, the firelight catching his silver hair. "But the fight is not over. It has only changed. The war of guns and survey stakes is done. The war of paper and lawyers has begun." A headman from the northern ridge spoke. "Marshal Egan offers us protection. But for how long? A new president, a new general, and the paper treaty is broken." "Then we must make our own paper," Eve said, her voice quiet but clear in the respectful silence. "Marshal Egan's injunction is temporary. You must use this time. You must file a formal community boundary claim with the Federal Land Office. Use the photographs. Use the marker cord. Use Arthur Finch's testimony. Make your own map. In their language. In their courts." They saw the wisdom in it, but Hasty Yazzie shook his head. "We do not know this paper language. We are a people of the spoken word. We need a voice." All eyes turned to Kai. He was the bridge. He had been a scout. He understood them. Kai looked at the fire, at the faces of his people. He felt the weight of their expectation. He was the warrior, the man who had faced Reeves. But as he looked at the closed flap of Tahoe's hogan, he knew his place was here. "No," Kai said. "My place is here. We need to rebuild what my brother's mistake tore down." He turned to a younger man, his cousin, who had learned to read and write at the agency school. You will go. Denali, you will go to Santa Fe and learn this paper law. We will all pay. We will sell our silver. We will sell our wool. You will be our tongue." Denali, who had always been quiet, sat up straight. He looked at Kai, at Hastian Yazi. He nodded. "I will go. I will be your voice." The council was over. A path was chosen. The next morning, Eve woke to the sound of metal on hard earth. She emerged from Shima Sani's hogan into the cold. Gray light. Tahoe was standing in the middle of the ruined cornfield. He was alone, holding a heavy shovel. He was just digging, turning over the trampled, ruined earth, his movements jerky, furious, and filled with self-hatred. Kai came and stood beside him. Tahoe did not look up.
"It was my fault,"
Tahoe said,
his voice choked. "All of it. I will fix it."
"You cannot fix what is dead," Kai said simply. He pointed to the dry, packed earth. "The rains from the storm are gone. The sun is hot. This corn will not grow back. Shouting at the past will not feed us in winter." He picked up a digging stick. "The spring in the high wash is still running. If we want to eat, we must bring the water here." Tahoe looked up, his eyes wide. "The high wash, that is 2 miles, Kai, through the rock." "Then we had best start," Kai said. He struck the earth with his stick, beginning the long, shallow trench. Tahoe stared, then jammed his own shovel into the ground, his furious, useless guilt replaced by a single, burning purpose. He began to dig. They worked alone for an hour. Then, the 2 young men who had been Tahoe's friends appeared. They carried no shovels. They just stood, watching. Tahoe did not stop. Kai did not look at them. Finally, one of them, the one who had spat near Eve's feet, walked back to his hogan and returned with his own digging stick. He started digging, a foot behind Tahoe. The other man joined him. By noon, 6 other young men from the valley were there, working in silence. There were no apologies. There was no discussion. There was only the sound of work, the scraping and thudding of tools against the hard, red earth. Eve watched them, her heart tight in her chest. She went and retrieved her heavy box camera. She set it up on the ridge, the sun at her back. She did not take photographs of the broken treaty stones. She took photographs of the men, their backs bent, their faces sweating, their muscles straining as they fought the stubborn land. She documented the first few yards of the ditch that would one day be 1/4 of a mile long. The work, she thought, as she slid the glass plate into its case. The work is their answer. A week later, a federal rider, part of Marshal Egan's new, expanded patrol, arrived. He carried a mail pouch, and in it, a letter for Eve. She sat with Kai and Shima Sani in the evening shade, the sound of the ditch digging a distant rhythm in the air. She read the letter aloud. The news from Santa Fe was final. Judge Mercer had been formally indicted by a federal grand jury. His career was over. Silas Voss had, as the lawyer predicted, vanished. His shares in the railroad had been seized by his creditors, and the entire corporation was in receivership, its charter under review. Blackjack Reeves, his arm healing but his spirit broken, had been tried, convicted, and was on the prison wagon to Yuma, sentenced to 20 years for a litany of crimes. The war was truly over. The victory was complete. The rider had also brought a second letter, this one forwarded from the postmistress Martha, who had added a small, spidery note. "Well done, child." The letter was from the Prescott Courier. Eve stared at the official letterhead. Her hands, calloused now from hauling water and mixing mud, were trembling. The letter was effusive. Her story, the one she had sent from 2 Rivers, had been published. It was a sensation. It had been picked up by papers in Denver and San Francisco. At the bottom was the offer, a full-time position, border correspondent for the Arizona Territory, a real salary, a platform, A chance to be the voice for all the other valleys, all the other people who had no one to stand for them. It was her father's vindication. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. That evening, she did not help with the cooking. She walked, the letter clutched in her hand, up the high ridge, the one where Kai had shown her the two paths. She sat on the edge of the world, watching the sunset bleed crimson and gold across the vast sky. She felt Kai's presence before she saw him. He sat beside her, not touching, just sharing the silence. "You won," he said. He nodded to the letter. "That is what you wanted, is it not?" "Yes," she said, her voice small. "It is everything." "You are leaving," he said. It was not a question. Eve felt a sudden, sharp panic. I do not know. My life, my work. It has always been about moving, finding the story, telling it, moving on. My mother and I, we never stayed in one place long enough to plant a tree. I do not know how to stay." Kai was silent for a long time. He looked down at the valley, at the small cluster of hogans, the sheep in their pen, the dark, hopeful scar of the new irrigation ditch. "When I was a scout," he said, his voice low, "I was away for 3 years. I missed this place. I missed the smell of the air, the color of this rock. I thought I would die if I did not see this canyon again. I thought the land was my home." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes clear in the fading light. "I was wrong. This is just dirt. Shimasani's Hogan is just mud and wood. Home. Home is not a place. It is the people you choose to stand with." He gently took her hand, the one with the turquoise bracelet. "My grandmother's Hogan is her home because we are there. This valley is our home because we are fighting for it. Home is not a place you find. It is a place you make." He paused. "You do not have to know how to stay, Evelyn. You just have to know you are not leaving alone." The next day, Kai did not go to the ditch. He began a new project. He started clearing a flat, protected piece of ground, 50 yards from his grandmother's home, beside the replanted, hopeful patch of green corn. He was felling juniper trees, stripping the branches, measuring the ground. Eve came to him, carrying a bucket of water. "What are you doing?" "Building," he said, not looking up from his work. "Another sheep pen." "No," he said, sinking the post-hole digger deep into the earth. "A home for the future." She put the water down. She picked up a smaller branch and began stripping the bark. They worked. Their lives fell into a new rhythm. In the mornings, she helped Shimasani hauling the heavy water buckets, her back and shoulders aching, or grinding the corn, her hands learning the steady, rocking motion. In the afternoons, she helped Kai. She mixed the mud and straw, her hands raw, her skirt stained, passing the thick plaster to him as he set the heavy logs. In the evenings, they sat together, repairing tack. She learned to stitch the thick leather of his saddle. He carved a new, smooth handle for her broken shovel. They were living, working, breathing as one. A quiet, domestic partnership that felt more real, more binding than any kiss. Kai knew this. One evening, when Eve was inside organizing her glass plates, he sat with Shimasani and Hastinyazi. He spoke in Dain, his voice formal. "My grandmother, my elder. I wish to build my life with the woman Evelyn. She is not of the people, but her heart is. She walks in Hozo. She stood with us, and she speaks the truth. I am building our Hogan." He was not asking for permission. He was honoring the tradition. "I ask you, Hastinyazi, as my elder, to speak for me, to speak for my family, and to ask her, in the proper way, to join my fire." Shimasani smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "We have seen. My son, she is already here. She has been hauling your water for a week. She just does not know the words for it yet." Hastinyazi nodded, his face serene. "It is a good choice. I will speak." Before he could, The land tested them one last time. The brief moisture from the big storm had passed. A short, sharp drought settled on the valley, baking the new ditch dry. And with the drought, the coyotes grew bold. Tahoe's young cousin, set to watch the main sheep flock, fell asleep. A pack of coyotes, silent and quick, scattered the flock into the high, dangerous canyons. It was a potential disaster. The sheep were their winter supply, their blankets, their wealth. Tahoe was the first to find the sleeping boy, but his voice was not angry. It was firm. "Wake up, we have work." There was no blame. There was no shouting. The community gathered in the pre-dawn light. "They are scattered," Kai said. "We ride in pairs. We find them." The entire camp, Kai, Tahoe, the young men, and Eve spread out, a coordinated search party. This was the test of their newfound unity. Eve, paired with Kai, remembered the tracking lessons he had taught her. She saw the small, broken branch, the dislodged pebble. It was her eye that caught the faint track on a high, rocky ridge. "This way," she said, pointing. She was the one who found them. The main flock, -2, huddled in a narrow box canyon. They returned to the valley not as heroes, but as a family, a single, working body. Tigas_Abur, who had organized the search with a calm efficiency, had found his place again, not as a rebel, but as a leader. That evening, Eve sat on the ridge again, the letter from Prescott in her lap. The choice was sharp and clear now. Go and be the reporter she was born to be, the voice for the voiceless, her father's dream realized. Stay and be the woman she had become, a part of a home, a part of a family, a part of a man who was more honest and strong than any she had ever known. She looked down into the valley. The hogan was half-built, its strong wooden skeleton a promise against the red rock. She saw Kai. He was in the central clearing, surrounded by 4 small children, Tahoe's nieces and nephews. He had his lariat. He was not hunting. He was not fighting. He was showing a small, laughing girl how to build the loop. He spun it, a slow, easy circle in the air, and let her catch it. He was patient. He was gentle. He was laughing, a sound as rare and welcome as rain. Eve watched him, the warrior, the scout, the survivor teaching a child how to tie a knot. Her heart, she knew, was no longer her own. It was down there, in the dust, rooted beside the new corn and the half-built house. But her mind, the sharp, trained mind of a reporter, still heard the clatter of the telegraph machine, the call of the next story, the duty to all the other people who needed a voice. She folded the letter, her choice still balanced, unresolved, on the edge of the cooling wind. The dawn was cold, a pale, clean gray that promised a new day, not a continuation of the last. Evelyn Callahan had not slept. She had sat on the ridge, the letter from Prescott in one hand, the turquoise from Shimasani on the other, until the stars faded. She had watched Kai teach the children to tie knots, and in that simple, patient act, her own internal knot had come undone. She walked down from the ridge as the first light touched the red rock. Her choice was made. He was waiting for her, not at his grandmother's hogan, but at the new one, their hogan. The framework was complete, a strong, 6-sided skeleton of juniper logs, facing the rising sun. A small fire crackled in the newly marked fire pit, and the scent of coffee, a luxury from Santa Fe, hung in the air. The small patch of replanted corn nearby was a vibrant, stubborn green. Kai stood as she approached. He did not ask her what she had decided. He already knew. He had seen the war inside her. The same war he had fought, the war between the duty you were born to and the life you had chosen. "Evelyn," he said, his voice quiet in the vast morning. He held out his hand. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a proposal. In his rough, calloused palm lay a ring. It was not gold, not a diamond from the east. It was silver, wide and heavy, hammered by a dinesmith. Carved deep into its surface was a single, stylized design, A turtle. For the earth. With a spray of delicate blossoms. For life. I cannot ask you to be a dean wife, he said, his voice raw with an emotion he rarely showed. I cannot ask you to give up the world you carry in that bag. He nodded to her satchel. He stepped closer, his dark eyes holding hers. But I ask you to build this home with me. I ask you to walk beside me, not behind me and not in front of me. Beside me, as my partner, as my wife. Eve looked at the silver ring, the symbol of the earth and new life. Then she looked at the letter in her other hand, the one from Prescott, the symbol of her old life, her father's vindication. She felt the pull, the tearing of two worlds. She did not set the letter down. Instead, she reached out and took the ring, her fingers closing over the cool, heavy silver. Yes, she whispered. The word was small, but it was the strongest one she had ever spoken. I will. She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Then she held up the letter. But you must know, Kai, I am accepting this. She touched the ring. But I am not giving this up. Her voice grew strong, the voice that had rung out across the plaza. I will not stop. My father's story was buried because he was silenced. I will not be the story of this land, the story of your people, of our people. It needs a voice. I will be that voice. I will keep writing. She waited, her breath held, wondering if her condition, her refusal to be anything less than who she was, would break the moment. Kai looked at the letter, then at her fierce, determined face. A slow, deep smile spread across his lips, the one that reached his eyes, the one she had seen only in the heart of the storm. I know, he said. He reached out and touched her cheek. I would not have asked you if I thought you would stop. Your words are your truth. Your photographs are your hozo. Write, Evelyn. Write the truth until the whole world hears it. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. You write, I will protect. The sun broke over the canyon rim, and he kissed her. It was not the desperate, exploratory kiss of the storm. It was a kiss of arrival. It was a kiss that tasted like coffee and wood smoke, and it felt like home. They were not married by a priest or a judge with a paper warrant. They were joined by the land itself. That afternoon, Shima Sani and Hastinyazi came to the new Hogan. It was not a grand ceremony. It was a blessing. Shima Sani carried a small basket of blue cornmeal. Hastinyazi carried his prayer stick. A home is not the walls, Hastinyazi said, his old eyes on the new-cut logs. It is the fire in the center. Shima Sani took a pinch of cornmeal. She scattered it to the four directions, and a final pinch onto their small, crackling fire. Hozho, she said. Balance, beauty, you. She looked at Kai. Bring the strength of the rock, and you. She looked at Eve. Bring the voice of the water. Rock and water together. That is how the canyon is carved. That is how a home is made. Walk in beauty. It was that simple. It was that profound. It was enough. The valley healed. The Federal Review, pushed by Marshal Egan and armed with Denali's new legal knowledge, was swift. The original treaty lines, proven by Shima Sani's cord and Eve's photographs, were ratified. The Voss land grab was permanently broken. The families, like the Peters, who had been pushed out, were restored to their homesteads. Life expanded. Tahoe, his shame now channeled into a fierce, quiet work ethic, finished the irrigation ditch. The water flowed, dark and rich, into the ruined cornfield. But his penance was not over. He came to Kai one evening, his hat in his hands. Brother, he said, I am not a farmer. My heart is not in the earth. I know, Kai said. The blacksmith in Santa Fe, the one who fixed the army wagon. He needs an apprentice. I want to build things. Kai, I want to work with fire and steel. I want to make things that last. Kai placed his hand on his brother's shoulder. The wound was healed. "Then go," he said. "Make good, strong things." The family grew, not in numbers, but in strength. She Masani, her authority cemented, began to teach the old songs to the children, the ones that told the stories of the long walks. Eve sat with her, her hands so nimble with a pencil, clumsy and slow on the loom. She Masani patiently showed her how to pass the shuttle, how to pack the wool tight, how to weave the patterns of the land into the fabric. In the afternoons, the roles were reversed. In the shade of the brush ramada, Eve set up a slate. The children, and even some of the adults, gathered. She taught them. She taught them the letters. She taught them how to write their names. She taught them the paper language of the men who had tried to steal their homes. Kai sat in the back, watching, his pride a quiet, steady warmth. It was the first school in the valley, a school of words and pictures, of looms and letters. The world outside remembered them. One day, the federal rider returned, carrying a large, flat parcel. It was from the photographer in Santa Fe. It contained copies of all of Eve's glass plates, developed and printed on fine, stiff paper. Eve took the photographs, her story told in shades of black and white. She did not keep them in her hogan. She rode to 2 rivers. Martha, the postmistress, was behind the counter. She smiled when Eve entered. "I heard you made some noise, child," Martha said, her eyes twinkling. "We had help," Eve replied. She held out the photographs. "I want these to stay here, where people can see them." Eve pinned them to the rough wooden wall of the post office. The ancient treaty stone, the false survey stake, the men digging the ditch, Kai, Tahoe, and the others, their faces shining with sweat and purpose. They were not just evidence. They were a memory, a public record, in the one place where news and community met, to ensure no one ever forgot. The seasons turned. The first fragile harvest from the new cornfield was gathered. The air grew crisp, smelling of snow from the high peaks. One night, the moon was a perfect, cold silver disk, so bright it cast sharp shadows on the red earth. They sat outside their finished home, a fire burning low. The hogan was solid, its mud walls warm. The weaving Eve had made hanging crooked but proud on the wall. Kai was quiet, staring into the flames. Eve smiled, leaning against his shoulder. The exhaustion of the past year had settled, leaving a deep, quiet peace. She felt his stillness, the familiar, contained strength. She remembered that night, the rain, the fear, the cold. She remembered the spark that had begun this. She nudged him, her voice a low tease. "Well," she whispered, "aren't you gonna kiss me?" He turned, his face soft in the moonlight. The slow grin she loved spread across his lips. "All night," he answered, his voice a low, warm promise. "If you can handle it." He kissed her. It was a kiss of absolute trust, of shared history. It was the kiss of a man who was no longer just a warrior, and a woman who was no longer just a reporter. They were, finally and completely, home. The high desert sun rose the next morning, flooding the canyon with clear, golden light. It struck the walls of the small hogan, and it struck a length of cord strung between 2 juniper posts. On it, held by wooden pins, hung Eve's photographs, not of violence, but of life. Tahoe, his arms thick with muscle, hammering a red-hot horseshoe at a new forge. She Masani, her hands a blur, teaching a young girl to weave. Kai, his back to the camera, his hand on his brother's shoulder as they looked over the new, green corn. The wind, the eternal, restless wind of the high mesas, came down the canyon. It fluttered the drying photographs. It carried the scent of wood smoke, and with it, the sound of children laughing as they learned their letters, and the sharp, clear ring of a blacksmith's hammer. The West does not tame anyone. It only accepts those hearts brave enough to stand tall and love fiercely. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales. Give this video a like and support us by hitting that hype button so we can share these stories with even more people.